So I have a really cool full stack tutorial where I'm going to be showing you how to build out this auction site called bidbuddy.com using Next.js with server actions. And I'm going to be using Drizzle ORM to connect to a Postgres database that's running locally with Docker and Docker Compose. And I'm also using knock.app for notifications. So when someone outbids you on this platform, you can go and quickly outbid them as well. So let's just do a quick overview of what we're going to build. And then I'm going to walk you through how I built everything. So right now I'm logged in as a user and I'm currently looking at an auction, right? And so I own this auction. I can't actually bid on these shoes, but other people can come in and start placing bids. So let's just create a brand new auction to kind of demo. And I'm going to go ahead and say climbing shoes is what we're going to sell. And I want to sell them for $85. You know, they're mildly used, a little bit moldy, a little bit stinky, but they're still good. Let's just go ahead and find a picture of those climbing shoes. All right, you got some Las Sportivas, and I'm going to go ahead and mark this to end on the 16th. And so when this bid is created, other people in the system can come on and they can start placing bids on it, right? So again, I created this one, so I can't go on and bid on this, but if I were to log out, I can go ahead and log into someone else and bid on this. So let's do that. I'm going to log in as someone else. And by the way, this is using Next.auth, and it's all set up with Google authentication. So let's log in as another account that I own. Let's go to the place bid button for the shoes. And here you'll see there's a climbing shoe. The current bid is at 85. The starting price is at 85 and the bid interval is $1. So if I were to place a bid, that is going to bid it for $86. And now I have the highest bid on this item. Okay, so now someone else can log in and they could also place a bid on this as well. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that this has a bell icon, and when someone else logs in and places a bid on this shoe, I will get a live update when someone else bid it on this. And I'll also get an email notification to my own personal email saying that, hey, someone's outbid you on this. Let's sign out. I'm going to sign in one more time as someone else, and we'll place a bid on those shoes. Okay, let's go back to the climbing shoes. I'm going to go ahead and just place a bid. And now I've outbidded the last user by $1. I'm at 87 for the current bid. And I want to show you, if I log back out for the other user, again, if they're already logged into the system, they will get this live update. They will see this notification icon, have one unread notification, and then it says someone outbidded you on climbing shoes by $87. If I click on this, it'll take me to the item, and I can just go ahead and outbid them once more. So a lot of cool stuff in this tutorial. Obviously, we have a page where you can see all the auctions that you have uploaded. We don't have any auctions uploaded for this user, and then we can go back and see all the auctions in the system. So it's a really nice starting tutorial, I think, which teaches you a lot about various things. We also have this end date set up, which again, if I were to go over here to the item, and if I go and change the end date for the climbing shoes to be, I don't know, like on the 12th, so a couple days ago, and I go back and refresh the page, notice that we have a badge that pops up that says bidding over. The ability to bid on the item is gone now. If I go back to all auctions, you'll see that now we don't have a place bid item, we have a view bid. So there is a little bit of, conditional logic that's set up to hide and show different buttons. And also, if you're an owner of the auction, you can't bid on your own thing. So that's all we're going to be building in this tutorial. But before we jump into the code and start building this together, I want to say that this video was made possible thanks to our sponsor, Knock. Go check them out. They have a really great notification system, which allows you to have in-app notifications. Like I mentioned, you can easily create templates where notifications will automatically send out emails to your users. So this is the email notification we got. Check out that auction. If I click that, it takes me to the item. They have a really nice dashboard, which allows you to create something called workflows, where again, you basically create a workflow. You can come through here and you can create what happens when someone tries to send off an API notification from your system. And in my case, I have a user placed bid workflow. And when I trigger that from my Next.js application, that's going to go ahead and send off in-app notifications to all users who are associated with that auction. And then also it uses resend to connect to a third-party email service and send out emails as well. There's a built-in way to basically do email templates. So this is the template builder that you saw on that email. And sending out these notifications is as simple as basically writing this line of code, right? Knock.workflows.trigger. I choose what workflow I want to send out, who's sending it, who should receive it, and then my users automatically get those notifications. So really, really great service. Definitely go check it out if you need a way to quickly add in in-app notifications or just email notifications. They have integrations with a bunch of different other services, but I won't dive into all that right now. Probably later on in the video, I'll talk more about this dashboard. But with no further ado, let's just go ahead and dive in and start building out this bidding site application that I talked about. Hope you guys enjoy. All right, so the first thing I like to do in all my tutorials is I like to make a new repository. So I'm logged into GitHub right now. Let's go over to the right and let's go ahead and move this so you can actually see what I'm doing. Let's click on a new repository here, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Bid Buddy. All right, that is the application we're going to be building. Go ahead and make this an MIT license, and it's going to be public. Go ahead and create it. And then at this point, we can go ahead and clone this repo down to my local laptop. So let's go ahead and click on this clone button. I am using SSH. I have an SSH key setup, which I recommend doing if you're going to clone stuff, but you can also use HTTPS if you want to. Going over to VS Code, let's just go ahead and clone that repo. So I'm going to go to my workspace. I'll just do git clone. We'll go ahead and bring in BidBuddy, and then I'm going to open up BidBuddy, and we can start setting up our Next.js application. So in the terminal, if you want to get started with a Next.js application, you can just do npx create next app at latest, and then I will just do in my current working directory like this. That'll ask you a couple questions. I'm just going to go ahead and say use all the defaults because I like TypeScript, I like Tailwind, and we should be good to hit the ground running when this is done installing. All right, that is done installing, and what we could do now is I'm going to go ahead and commit everything. So go ahead and add all these. I'm going to say initial commit, and by the way, as you're going through this tutorial, you can go back to that repo and you can follow along with my commits if you want to like get snapshots of progress over time. I highly recommend when you're doing real development to do as many small incremental commits as you can. All right, let's just go ahead and run this project and make sure that it's working in a browser. So let's go to localhost 3000 over here, and we should be good. Here's our Next.js application, and we are cooking. So at this point, we can't really build an application without having some type of database. Okay, so I recommend using Postgres, and I like using a Docker Compose file to spin up a database locally so I can do some development. You're welcome to use something like Supabase if you want to find a free database or Postgres host. But personally, if you're doing development, I would just recommend getting Docker and Docker Compose. So let's make a new file called Docker Compose YAML. And do forgive me, I'm just going to paste in a snippet because it's just tedious to type this out by hand. But I'm going to rename this. We're going to call it BidBuddy. Not big, BidBuddy database. And we will use the default ports here, and we will just basically spin up a Postgres database. So if you don't know how Docker Compose works, basically you have this YAML file, and this line 4 is the very important part. This is saying go to Docker Hub, which is a website. Let's go to Docker Hub, and that's specifying that I want to use the Postgres image. So if you go ahead and search Postgres, you'll see that there is an image called Postgres, and that is exactly what this is referring to. So I'm saying just give me the latest Postgres image, run it on this port, mount it to this volume. So if you don't know how volumes work, basically inside the Docker image itself or the Docker container, there is a file system that you can mount to your own file system here. So we're basically saying inside the container at data/Postgres, I want you to mount to this volume I have basically created. And then somewhere behind the scenes, Docker daemon will figure out where to store that database information. This might be way over your head. You might not care. But the cool thing is that now that you have this Docker Compose file, you can just go over here and you can say Docker Compose up. Now, again, this is assuming you have Docker installed. Hopefully you do. If you don't, just go to like Docker and install the desktop version of whatever you need, and it should work. Okay, so now you'll see that we have a database running, and I like to go over here and just rename this. I'll call this like database. I put 2 A's there, but it's fine. Let's just go ahead and make this next. And now that we have a running database, we want to install some type of way to connect to that database. So I'm going to go ahead and install something called Drizzle ORM. This is the ORM I like to use on my projects now. Pretty nice. So let's go to orm.drizzle.team. I'm going to go to documentation, and they'll walk you through how to kind of get this set up. We are going to be using Postgres. So let's just go to the Postgres SQL walkthrough, and we are going to click on Postgres.js. They have like different adapters for different types of databases, but we are using Postgres. Let's click on this, and then we're going to install this. Go over here and run that on our BidBuddy project. And we'll go ahead and copy this one too and run that when this is done installing the Drizzle ORM. I am getting some weird type of dependency error, so I'm just going to say force here. Sometimes npm has issues and you just have to kind of like force it to install things, and then that'll probably get fixed later on. Let's also install Drizzle Kit. So I'll show you what all this stuff is in a bit. Drizzle Kit is basically a way to have a nice visual editor for your database. If you don't have like your own special one, like there's paid services like Table Plus you can use. If you want a nice Postgres editor, there's also extensions you can have in VS Code. But now that Drizzle is installed, what we're going to do is we're going to make a file that's going to kind of look like this, but we need to basically go over here to our source directory. I'm going to make a folder called DB, and inside that DB folder, I'm going to make an index. Actually, I'm just going to call it database.ts. So I'm just going to paste in some code. This is just boilerplate. You kind of need this in Next.js because every time you save a file, it basically tries to create a new connection to your database. So there's a little bit of connection caching going on over here. It kind of initializes the Drizzle library and it passes it a Postgres connection so that you can start connecting and talking to your database when you import this file. So this is the file that we're going to be using all throughout our Next.js application to read and write from the database. And I apologize if you don't like me just copying and pasting code, but honestly, like come through here later and try to understand what's going on. It's not too important to know all the details at this point. But you will notice there's some red at the top. And the reason this is red is because I like using a package for setting up my environment variables. So I'm going to install another library called T3OSS env-nextjs. So let's just go ahead and install that like this. And this is a way to have your environment variables be typed. It's a much nicer developer experience than just doing process.env everywhere. Okay. So in order to get this working, what we need to do is I'm going to make a env.ts file over here. Do source env.ts. And what we need to do is we're going to go ahead and import create env from @t3, and I'll go ahead and import that. Again, this is like a package as part of the Theos community. We're also going to bring in Zod. Okay, so I think Zod is something we're going to have to install as well. Let's just go ahead and install Zod here. And we're going to go ahead and export a constant called env, and this is what we're going to use instead of doing process.env all throughout our code base. We're going to be using this. We're going to define some server variables. We're going to define some client variables. And then we're also going to do a runtime env over here. Okay, I know it's a lot of information, but this will all click after we have this kind of set up. So again, if you go back to the database, notice that we're trying to import it now, but it's complaining because it doesn't know where node env is. It doesn't know where database URL is. So what the purpose of this package is inside a server, you can go ahead and define that this needs to be a URL. And then over here, we can say runtime environment process.env.this. Actually, URL, I think string.url. Okay. So what we're doing is we're defining a requirement and saying that all the environment variables we need to get this running, they're going to be defined here. So now if we go back to database, notice that the red squigglies went away for database URL. We're going to do the same thing for node environment. We're going to say this is z.string. We'll say min of 1. And then we're also going to go over here and say node environment is process env node environment. Okay. So now all the type errors should go away except for schema. This is another thing that we're going to have to end up bringing in. So let's go back to Drizzle. First, I want to make a schema file over here. So like schema.ts. So inside the schema file, this is where you can define your tables in your database. Remember, we have the database running in that Docker compose, but we need to use Drizzle to define like what our tables are going to look like, what properties will live on those tables. So let's go ahead and import some things. I'm going to say import. I'm going to say pg table from, and then we should be able to bring in Drizzle ORM pg core. So like as you saw, there's a bunch of different packages depending on what type of database you're using, but we are using Postgres. So I'll say pg core. I'm going to save that, and then we can define a table. So for example, if I wanted to define one called like bids, we can go ahead and use that PG table, and we are going to define what columns would be living on that PG table. So I'm going to go ahead and just do ID, and we'll say text, and that's going to be ID. Actually, I think we could probably do serial. So there's different like column types. In this case, we want to bring in the serial column type. And once you define the columns, I can make this a primary key like this. Go ahead and save that. And let's make sure this is all good. Oh, I forgot to name the table. So one thing that's important is you need to name what your table is going to be. So in our case, we're calling this project bid buddy. So I'm going to say bb_bids. This is the internal variable you're going to use in your application, and this is the name of your table that is going to be defined in your actual Postgres database. Okay, so now that we made that schema.ts file, go back here and let's try to figure out why it can't find this module, because it's literally in this directory. So sometimes kind of just got to kick TypeScript a little bit. Let's just go ahead and force restart TypeScript. Hopefully it can find that schema file, and now it does. So it's happy. So the reason we define the schema is because we want to create a table that we can start storing some information into. So going back to our terminal, one approach you can use is using something called Drizzle Kit to basically apply your changes to your table. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can do this. I'm going to say npx drizzle kit, which I think we already npm installed. And then you can say we want to do a push. We're going to use the Postgres driver, and then we're going to give it a config file. We'll say drizzle.config.ts. Now we haven't created a drizzle config file, so let's go ahead and make that drizzle config.ts. And then we're going to go ahead and define that over here. So what the drizzle config does is, again, it's specifying where your migration scripts will live and some various other things that Drizzle needs. So I'm going to go ahead and just say export default define config. I thought I saw it show up, but let's just go ahead and do this. And I'll guess I'll import it up here because it didn't auto import for some reason. So I need to import that from Drizzle Kit. And then over here, we need to say the schema is going to live in source db.schema.ts and type. And then driver, we're going to use PG for Postgres. And then for out, we're going to say make the migration scripts live in a Drizzle folder. So like when we run this, you'll see a Drizzle folder probably get created. The important part, the database credentials, we need to specify where our database will live. So let's go ahead and import that .env file that I mentioned before. We'll pass database URL. And then we're going to go ahead and say verbose true, strict true. Actually, it looks like there's a new version of Drizzle Kit, so that's pretty cool. You guys got to learn this. So they're basically saying we have to add dialect of Postgres SQL here. So let's go here. It's like dialect Postgres SQL. And then we'll go back over here. Driver needs to only be set if you're using AWS Data API Terso. Okay, so I don't need to set driver anymore. And then for DB credentials, this needs to be URL, I guess. Okay, so hopefully that works. And now I don't even need to add a prefix, I believe. Let's go back over here, get rid of this prefix, and let's try running this. So again, the whole point where we're making this file is so that we can say Drizzle Kit push, and that's going to read this config file, and it should hopefully look through our schema file and apply the changes to our database. Now notice we did get this error over here, and this error is expected because that library that we installed, the env library, that's expecting certain things to be defined, right? So in our case, we don't have database URL defined. We don't have node environment defined. So that's awesome. It kind of lets us know that we have something misconfigured. I'm going to make a .env file, and typically I think people say .local now these days. I'm going to say make sure database URL is defined, and also make sure node env is equal to development. Now for database URL, we need to put a URL to point to our database. So I'm going to go ahead and just do all that. And then I'm going to try to rerun Drizzle Kit push. Sorry, actually, I need to get rid of the local. I guess this doesn't work with local. So now you'll see that it asks you, hey, do you want to run this? And we're going to go ahead and say, we do want to run this. So what this is doing, if you're not familiar, basically what Drizzle and Prisma and other ORMs do is they look at your schema file and they try to figure out how to automatically write your migration scripts and apply them to your database. So in our case, it notices that we added a new table called bbbids. It has this column in it. And when we ran this drizzle kit command, it's trying to basically apply those to our locally running Postgres database. So I'm gonna go ahead and say yes, apply those. And now you'll see it says changes applied. Now what I like to do is I like to take this command and I like to put it in my package.json because I always forget what the commands are. So I'm gonna say db push, and we're gonna just go ahead and paste that directly in here so we don't forget it in the future. Now there's also something else I really love adding to my projects, and that is DB Studio. So what we can do is we can actually now run npm run db studio, and that's going to host up a URL for us that we can click. Just go ahead and go to that. And now we can see that the bbbids table exists with a single ID column. So we can actually start adding records to this. And the really cool thing is that now Next.js can connect to this database and start reading and writing data to it, assuming I didn't miss anything, but I think we should be good. I am going to go ahead and just commit what we have. So I'm going to go ahead and say, but we don't want to commit the .env file. I'm going to open up the git ignore, and we do want to say .env and just make sure that's defaulted as an ignore file. And then we're going to go ahead and add everything, and I'll say setting up the Postgres plus Drizzle configs. And then we'll go ahead and save that and commit it. So we made some progress, but we haven't actually like coded anything, right? It'd probably be nice if we actually coded something instead of just configuring stuff all day. So I went ahead and cleaned up this home page, and let me kind of walk you through how Next.js works. So Next.js is a file-based router where every directory is going to dictate your pathing in your Chrome browser. So if you go to / the root of your URL, that's going to load this page.tsx. And then what we can do is we can start putting stuff here. So let's say hello world, go ahead and save this file. And then we'll go back over here and let's go to our app and notice that hello world pops up in the top. Cool. So what we want to do is we want to create a form where someone can basically just create these bids. I'm going to make a form here, and I'm going to make an input, and I'll say this is going to have a name of bid. It could be a type number, it could be a placeholder. All this is just kind of me explaining how we can connect to the database using Drizzle. And then we'll also add a button, and then we'll go ahead and say like place bid. This could be a type submit over here. Let's just go ahead and save that. So now that we have a form, what we want to do is we want to run a server action when someone tries to submit this form. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a function here. I'm going to inline this for right now, but sometimes I like to add my actions into a different file. So in Next.js, you can actually make functions. These are called server actions, where you can actually run some backend code the moment someone tries to submit this form. So what we want to do is we want to get the form data like this. Go ahead and just type that. And then we can get the bid, which is going to come from the form data. So I can say bid is equal to form data dot get. We can say bid as string. Actually, let me just go ahead and change this to be not have a type. So that should default to text. We might not even use this because the way we have our table set up, it just has a unique identifier. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and import that database object that we have created inside of here. Remember, we made this little boilerplate. I copied some code in, but there's a database object that we can use. I'm going to say database, and we might have to auto import this or manually import this up here. So I'm going to say import this from @/database/database. Okay. Make sure you do a from. And now this is the library, the Drizzle library tool that we can use to basically do something with the database. I can say database dot, and we're going to insert into a table. So in our case, we're going to say bids. We're going to import that from the schema file that we have. And then we're going to say values. And then we're just going to go ahead and create a very empty record over here. Let's just save this. And technically, we don't even need this. I'm going to comment out. I don't know why I was doing that. But now we actually have a way to create records when someone submits this form. So if you go back over here, it says I think I just need to refresh the page. Let's just refresh the page. This functions cannot be passed directly to client components unless you explicitly expose it by marking it as use. Oh, I meant to say use server, not use client. I apologize. Okay, so now we got the form over here. And if I actually just click this, I don't have any like confirmation or alerts, but that should have created a record. If I go back to the studio and just refresh, let me zoom out one. There's a refresh button up here. I click it behind my head and notice that the number 1 pops up. So we just successfully created a bid. If I hard refresh this, you'll see it says 1 here. We have 1 bid that was created. And here is that auto incrementing ID that's going to be attached to that table. All right, so congratulations. You just created a record and you stored it in a database. But what would also be cool is if we could, when this page basically loads, we can fetch all the bids from the database and display them. So with React in Next.js, you have these React server components that allow you to fetch data when the page is first rendering on the server, right? So I'm going to say const bids is equal to await database. Make sure we go over here and we add an async in front of this React server component. I'm going to say query dot bids. Notice we get the auto completion here. And I'm going to say find mini. And just go ahead and call that. And that's going to fetch all the bids from that bids table. And what we can do here, there's a naming collision here. So I'm going to go ahead and say like bids schema. And I'm going to use that here instead. So then we don't have that naming collision. But again, what I was trying to do is over here, we can go ahead and just loop over those. So I'm going to say bids.map. And then for every bid we have, I'm going to make a div. I'm going to give this a key of bid.id. I think I need to call that bid, not bind. And then over here, we can just go ahead and display bid.id as well. All right. So a lot of information. I'm going to take a step back in just a second and kind of recap. But notice when this page loads, it does display 1. And so if I were to click this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, refresh the page, notice that we get back 6 total records. Awesome. So recap, what have we actually done here? I know this is like elementary, but if you're new to Next.js and Drizzle, this is a good introduction to how it all kind of works. So what we've done is we brought in Docker Compose to spin up a Postgres database. We brought in Drizzle ORM so we can easily read and write to that database using a nicer convention rather than doing like SQL commands directly. You have these cool functions you can call. It's all type safe. And then we created a page which has a form on it where we can actually just click a button and have it insert some data into our database. And then additionally, when this page loads for the first time, it fetches all the data from the database and we render that out to the page. Right, and this is the convention. Once you understand this, like we're literally going to be doing this for a majority of the pages in our application. It's usually a bunch of fetch data, make a form, save some data, maybe show an alert or a toast or some error state. But that's basically the pattern that a lot of web development does. Okay, so I do want to kind of spruce this up a little bit because there's a couple things that this page doesn't look too good. So to give you a crash course in Tailwind, typically what you want to do is inside of your main page containers, I'm going to go ahead and say this is going to be a container, and I'm going to say MX auto, and that'll kind of bring it in. So if I were to zoom out instead of being 100%, notice that that brings it in a little bit, which is good because if you have a really, really large monitor, you don't want stuff being all the way to the left of the monitor, right? So let's just go ahead and wrap stuff in containers. And then also what I like to do is just do a PY of 12. That's going to add padding to the top in the bottom of this container. And so you can visualize it. Let's just go ahead and click on this and notice that if I hover over this, we have some padding on the top, padding on the bottom. We got some margin on the left and the right. So at this point, if you watch my content, you'll know that I like using Shadcn for my component library. So I think it's time to docs over here. And then we're going to follow the installation guide. It's pretty easy to get set up with Next.js. I'm going to first just run this command here. All right. And then it's going to ask me some questions. Let's just go ahead and say use the defaults for everything. Why not? And that's going to set up some files for us. We got a components JSON file. We have some library files. And we also have some global CSS. Let's go over here and follow this approach as well. So let's go to the root layout. Let's just copy the lines that they tell us to do. do this. Go down and we're going to add that to the body. Find the body over here. Add this class name to it. And then auto import this CN library. So some new things that I should probably talk about is, first of all, we're bringing in basically a custom Google Web font called Font Sans, I believe. Actually, it's called Enter, but we're renaming it the Font Sans for some reason. And then down here at the bottom, we are using another library called CN. So if we look at this, this is basically just using Tailwind Merge in CLSX so that we can kind of easily combine Tailwind styles together. You'll end up using this library, this little helper utility function all throughout our code base, but you'll see basically you can pass it multiple strings that have Tailwind CSS classes. It just combines them together and figures out how to like have ones that come later on override the ones that are prior. All right, so let's keep going down. I think we have that set up. They're saying you can configure your theme inside the Tailwind config. Let's go over here and look at that and make sure that this thing is set up. So let's go to font family and make sure that's somewhere here. Doesn't look like it is. So let's just go ahead and copy this. We'll go to theme. We'll go to extend. We'll paste that in. And probably got to make sure we have the font family installed. And they give you an overview of the app structure and stuff. So the first thing you should probably do is just make sure this works. So let's just go ahead and grab this button component. This is how you can add new components to your application with Shadcn. They have this like a la carte, pick and choose what components you want. You end up installing a lot of these at the end of the day, but it's just nice because you don't have to like bring everything in at the get-go. You can just bring in a button and kind of build upon it. So let's just go ahead and run that command so we can bring in that button component. You'll see it installs the button, and then it's going to put it inside of a components directory. So over here we have components, UI. All the Shadcn components go in this directory. And you can kind of scroll through here and basically look at the code. That's one reason I like Shadcn, is that you own all of the code it brings in. It just copies and pastes it into your project, which allows you to fine-grain customize it as needed. Let's keep going. We're going to use this button on our form. So if we go back over here, let's just go ahead and change this. Instead of a lowercase button, let's make it a capital button. And then I'm going to go ahead and import this from that components directory. And if we did this correct, we can go back to our app and notice we have a nicely styled Shadcn button. You hover over it, it has hover states. You click it. I don't know what happens if you click it, but there we have it. Also the input. The input looks pretty bad, right? So again, turns out you can just go over here and find an input. We can just go ahead and install it. Make sure you do npm. Load up the terminal. Go ahead and run that. That'll install an input. And then when that's done, again, we can just like rename this one. Go ahead and auto import that from components. Save it, go back to our app, and there we have a nice looking input field. So one thing you'll notice is that as I'm like clicking the button, nothing is showing up over here, right? We want this page to refresh and show the latest data that we just added. So how you can do that in Next.js, if you're using server actions, you can just call a method and you can say revalidate path. So depending on what path you're currently on, in our case, we're on the root path. I'm just going to call revalidate path of /, and that's going to tell Next.js that you need to reload the data. It's going to rerun this component, refetch your bids, recompute your components and your JSX, and send that down. So now if I click it, notice that the 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 getting appended down here at the bottom. So very, very nice feature where you can just kind of like modify some data, mutate your database table, and then just tell Next to refresh basically. All right, let's do another commit over here. I'm going to go ahead and say bring in Shadcn and revalidate after adding items. Add all those changes here. And I'll commit those and I'll sync those up. So before we get too much further into building out this application, I need to bring in some type of auth library so that we can actually log in with Google and we can have cookies and sessions to keep track of what user is actually creating these various things in our application. So I'm going to go to auth.js.dev, which is basically the latest, greatest version of NextAuth. Now I will say NextAuth 5 is still in beta. So if you're not comfortable with using beta stuff, you can drop down to Next 4. But at some point, this should hopefully come out and it should be good to go. So let's go ahead and just click on Next.js here. And we want to follow this installation guide. So let's just go ahead and install Next Auth beta. Let's go down here, load up a terminal, and I'll just go ahead and run that. And as that's running, let's just go ahead and kind of read through this and figure out how to get this set up. So it seems like the only environment variable that is mandatory is auth secret. And you can create a secret by running this command, and you need to put it in your .env local, they say. I'll probably just add it to my .env and hopefully it still works the same way. So let's just go ahead and run that and see what it gives us. All right, here's our auth secret. Let's go to our env file and let's go ahead and paste that in and save it. Let's go back and let's keep on going through this and try to figure out how to set this up. So to configure Next Auth, you need to make an auth.ts file at the root of your app router. So let's go here and I'm going to add in the app router, I will make an auth.ts, paste that in. And then it says add a route handler under this location. So I can just copy that whole path here. And that started at app. So let's actually just go, let's grab the API here. And I'm going to go ahead and say new file, paste that in. And there we go. We got a file we can use. And let's just go ahead and paste this in. Actually, I think I need to put the auth in the source directory. Let's do that because that was kind of referring to the wrong file here. So now we need to make a middleware TS file. Let's copy that. And I think I put the middleware here. So I'll say middleware.ts. Paste that in. Hopefully that's good. And set up authentication method. So with that, the basic setup is complete. Next, we'll set up the first authentication method. Let's go ahead and go to the next section. Let's skip over this. We do want to set up Google. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Google. And we need to make sure that we have a callback URL set up like this. All right, so I'm going to go to console.cloud.google.com and then we can create a new project. This is where I have like all my random side projects set up. Let's make a new one. We'll call it Bid Buddy. And this doesn't take too long. You kind of have to set up a new project every time you do some type of OAuth with Google. So we should be able to get through this pretty quick. Let's click on Bid Buddy as our project and select it. And then we can go over here to API services and we can go to credentials. Okay. So let's create a credential and let's go to OAuth client ID. And then we are going to go ahead and configure our consent screen. That's the first thing you kind of need to do. I'm going to say this is an external app. Go ahead and click create. And then we're going to say the app name is Bid Buddy. And then we're going to go ahead and just put my email here. We can skip all this other stuff. We do need to add webdevcody@gmail.com. Go ahead and save that. And then down at the bottom, we will say save and continue. Save and continue. Back to dashboard. Okay, so now we set up our consent screen. That's kind of like the screen that people see when they want to sign in with your app. But let's go back to credentials and now we can actually create the OAuth client ID. So let's go ahead and click on this and say web application. I'll say Bid Buddy. Scroll down here. This is the important part. For authorized JavaScript origins, you're going to add localhost 3000. And then when you go to production, you're going to have to add like your real domain if you do have one. And for authorized redirect URLs, this is where in the docs they're saying you have to have basically this. So we're going to say HTTP localhost 3000 / and then I'm going to put that URL just like this. Okay, let's just go ahead and create this. And you're going to get a modal that has a client ID and a client secret. So we do need to copy this stuff. And then we're going to add that. Hopefully the docs tell us what to do with this. So yeah, they say add it here. So let's go back, copy this. Go here, paste that in, and go back to our UI. I'm going to copy the client ID, paste it right here, copy the secret, paste it right here. And obviously don't leak any of these things. If you leak these keys, your whole system is compromised. But we should be good. We're just doing some stuff locally. Let's close that. All right, so now let's set up the provider. When you're using Auth.js, you basically have to go to your auth config, and we can add a Google provider. So let's go to that auth file here. And then inside of providers, we're going to go ahead and just put in Google. Make sure you auto import that provider like that. And maybe I should just kind of follow exactly what they're doing so I don't run into some random snag and waste 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we can add a sign in button. So let's go ahead and looks like they give you a nice sign in component you could do. Go to components here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just say sign in TSX, paste that in, and we should hopefully be good. I don't know why they're importing a TS file there. That's not proper. And then if you load up the app and click the sign in button, you should be redirected to Google and you should be good. So let's go back to here, refresh the page, and we should see a sign in button. Oh wait, we haven't used it yet. So let's go ahead and go to our page. And I'm going to put a sign in button at the top. Just like that. Go. Fingers crossed. Will this work? We have a sign in button with Google. So click it. Takes you to Google. Select one of your accounts. You should hopefully get this. This is the OAuth consent screen we kind of configured, and it's kind of saying like what things this application needs from the user. Let's just go ahead and click continue. We should get redirected back to our app. And now we are actually authenticated. So if you go to your application tab in Chrome and you scroll down, you'll see that we have an Auth.js session token. This is the token. I think it's encrypted, so you can't really even look at it. But this is a token that has your information such as like your user ID and some other things as well. So let's just verify this a little bit more. We want to actually conditionally show a sign out button if we are signed in. Now, I don't really know how to do that because I haven't really messed with the beta before. So let's go to sign in and sign out and read through the documentation. So here's the sign in button we just did, but they also have a sign out button, which you can do like this. So basically you can, oh, sorry, this is a sign in button. That tells you how to sign in. Down here, we have a sign in button. Okay. Where's sign out? Here is a sign out button. Let's just go ahead and import this. And we're going to make a sign out button. So sign out.tsx, paste that in. And then again, not sure why they're importing some weird location there. This is beta after all, so let me not bash on it too much. Let's conditionally show this. So let's go ahead and first add a sign out button here. There you go. And then we're going to go ahead and just click it and make sure that that session token got deleted. So now you'll notice it doesn't have Auth.js session anymore. We are technically signed out of the application. But typically with Auth.js, there are some helper methods you can use, such as get session, to know if you're logged in or not. So over here, we can basically call this method. And if session.user is not defined, we know that we're not logged in. Okay, so let's go over here. And again, I'm kind of just trying to teach you as much as I can. We're not going to like make perfect code right now. I just want to make sure you understand what we're doing because we're going to keep building upon it. So let's just go ahead and try to import this auth method from that location. And then we have session here. Okay, again, this is how you check if a user is signed in or not. Technically, you could just check if the session is set. Okay, so that's how you check if you're signed in. What we could do is just say, well, if session is defined, then we will go ahead and show a sign out button. If it's not defined, we will show a sign in button. So let's go to our sign in and sign out button. I want to make them look a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and just change those to buttons like this. And then we look at it, it says sign in with Google. So it looks better. And then also for sign out button, let's go ahead and change those to be real Shadcn components. And so if we were to sign in and sign out, we should be able to sign in here, take us back to Google, and then we see a sign out button. So that's how you can conditionally show things on the page based on if you're logged in or not. That's pretty cool, right? It's very important to understand that because we're going to use that all throughout our application to check if you're authenticated, check if you have access to certain things. What you can also do is if you have the session defined, there should be a user object defined. And you can actually display the name of the user. Okay, so right here, displaying my name. And you can end up putting that in the header if you want to. Okay, so that's great. But the issue is that when a user signs into our application, we don't even track that. We don't know if what users are actually have signed in with Google or not. So typically there's something called adapters. And we are using Drizzle. If you go to adapters and click Drizzle, you will see a Auth Drizzle adapter that we can install. So let's just go ahead and run this. There you go. And then over here, we need to set a auth drizzle URL, which I'm guessing is just going to be a location to our database. So we might end up having like 2 URLs that point to the same exact database for some reason. But it is what it is. So let's just go ahead and paste that in. And then we are going to go back and we need to figure out how to set up our schema. Remember, in the schema file, we define like what tables our database has. If we want to track the user, then we're going to have to create a users table, an accounts table, sessions table, and a verification token table. So let's go there. Let's go to our schema. And then let's go ahead and paste this stuff in. There's going to be a lot of information that we're going to have to import. So let's just go ahead and auto import some of this stuff. So we make sure you always look at the package. It needs to say PG in it. PG core, that's what we want. Go ahead and just auto import what we can. I don't know where that came from. We'll have to figure that out. Let's go back to the docs. That comes from here. Timestamp comes from Drizzle, PG core. Integer, same thing. Primary key, what is this? Needs to come from PG core as well. And now there's only one error in our example. So let's go ahead and look at this. Adapter account type. I guess it's just called a adapter account. So these docs probably need to be updated. And then we can use that type over here. And hopefully this works. So once you've had the schema set up, what you can do is you can add that adapter over here to that auth config. So let's go to auth and let's add it there. Make sure you auto import the adapter. And database is actually what we want. We don't want DB. We want to make sure we import that database file, which it's not showing up. So let's just go ahead and say import database from @/db/database. All right, that should be good. So now let's do a npm run db push, and that's how you can basically take all the schema changes we just did. I think I told you this already, but this is how you kind of take the changes that you did and apply them to your database. So run this. It's going to tell you, hey, there's a bunch of things. Are you sure you want to run this? And I'm going to go down and say yes. So now it says changes applied. And if we were to go back through Drizzle Studio, refresh this, notice that we have account, session, user, and verification token. The one thing I do want to point out though is I like to prefix my tables with BB or whatever your project name is, because sometimes there are certain keywords in whatever database you're using that you try to create a table and you use a special reserved keyword, you're going to run into issues with your migration scripts. So over here, you can actually just put a comma and you can define your own schema here. So let's just go ahead and do this. And we're going to go ahead and just import accounts. We're going to import users, sessions, and verification tokens. You know, they tell you exactly how to do this, so maybe I should just copy what they have here. I must have a misspelling somewhere, and I'm not sure what's going on there. Adapter account is not assignable to type string. Let's go back to our schema and let's look at adapter account. I'm just going to do an as any. Hopefully this works. Keep my fingers crossed, but it just doesn't seem like it understands what this type is. But I think it should still work. Anyway, so again, the reason I did this is because I like to prefix my tables. So I'm going to say BB user, a BB account, a BB session, and then also BB verification token. And then I should be able to run a push again, and then go ahead and just say rename everything. Okay, everything's been renamed. And fingers crossed, if you go to Drizzle Studio, you should see all those pop up. Awesome. So we are getting this bug, and if you go and read up on this discussion, there's something going on with Postgres, and it just doesn't work when you put it in a middleware function. So we're going to have to downgrade. There's a couple of solutions you can do. You can downgrade Postgres to 3.3, I believe. So if I go over here, you know, I am running into some weird issues with the middleware, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Honestly, I haven't really found too many use cases for middleware. because we can still do authentication checks and authorization checks without the middleware file. I just don't like how Next.js is like so coupled to an edge runtime. I should be able to tell the middleware that I want to use Node, because it errors out with some of these Drizzle adapters, I believe. I think I forgot to run a migration or something. All right, I'm having some issues running this migration. I think I made too many changes, and sometimes this is something that's good to learn how to do, is you want to set up a Postgres Explorer so that you can just delete all your tables. Okay, so let's go over here. I'm going to add another connection here. So I have this Postgres Explorer that's built directly in the VS Code, and this is very important to understand how to use. I'm going to go ahead and add a connection, and we can just go ahead and put localhost. We can go ahead and say Postgres will be the user, password's going to be example, and then we're going to say the port is the default, and then we're going to go ahead and say yes, a standard connection. And then we'll say the Postgres database, and then we're going to name this bid buddy. Go ahead and save that. And then we can go and look at this table. The reason I'm doing this here is because you don't have the ability to like run drop tables from Drizzle Studio, I don't believe. Like if I wanted to say delete drop table bb user, I don't think this will run. So let's just go ahead and say Command-Shift-P. I'm going to say create a new SQL query, and then I'm going to select a connection. So let's just go ahead and say select, and then I'm going to say SQL select connection. Okay, I want to make sure it's on bid buddy. I want to select that database, and then we can go ahead and say drop table bb underscore account. And I think I need to say public, and then I need to do a dot. Let me go ahead and just put a cascade. Will that work? There we go. That dropped that user table. Let's refresh it. Do the same thing with user. Refresh that. Bids. Session. There's probably an easier way to do this, honestly. Verification token. All right, everything's been deleted. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm having some issues running a migration when I do a DB push. Let's try running it again. That should apply all those changes, absolutely no problems, and we should be good. So maybe you just learned something new about SQL right there, but if you're going to be dealing with a Postgres database, you probably need to understand how to do some like raw SQL queries manually, especially when you get into running migration scripts. Okay, let's try signing in again. Let's click on sign in with Google, click on my name, and now we are signing with Cody. And if I go back and refresh this, we get a user entry now. So now we've actually tracked that user when they log in for the first time. And we're going to be using this unique identifier to basically attach it to various types of entries we add to our table. So in our case, we're creating a bid, but it'd be nice if we could track like who this bid belonged to. So again, this is why we add authentication, so we can track things. So let's go back to the bids table. And honestly, I might just make a new table called items, because an item is basically what we want to upload to this site, and then people can come along and place bids on it or something. So I'm going to go ahead and say items, and this will be called bb item. And we're going to go ahead and grab this user ID because we want to grab that, go ahead and paste it in there. And then maybe we could add like an item name or something. So let's go and say name, it could be text, that could be called name, that could be not null. All right, let's do another DB push, and that should apply that schema change to our table. And we should now have a BB item table. So let's go back to our page. Instead of creating a bid, let's just go ahead and change this a little bit. This is going to be called name. And this will be called name your item. So if someone wants to sell a pair of shoes or something, they can go ahead and do that. And then we're going to call this post item. And the difference here is now we're going to insert into the item table. So we can just go ahead and say like items. Okay. And then for value, we do want to do name. So I'll say name, and we'll say form data get name as string. And then we're going to revalidate the path. And we're also going to change this. I'm going to say all items I'll change this query from bids to items. And go ahead and save this. Now the one thing that we need to add in now is we have to basically keep track of the user who created this item. Notice how this is still red. We're getting a TypeScript error. The reason that's happening is because we need to actually say user ID, and then we can say session.user.id. Technically, if you're not logged in, we probably shouldn't even show, like, allow you to click the button. And so adding these little question marks everywhere is not the best in terms of code maintainability. So what I would do is either early up here in your function, I'd say if there is no session, just go ahead and return null. And then also if there is no session.user, also just return null. And so that we don't have to come in here and add like these random question marks everywhere. There's other ways you can handle it. Let's say if like you're not logged in, you just want to not show this form. You could do it that way. Actually, let me go ahead and pull this out to a constant here. So I'll say like session.user, because TypeScript is not understanding that this is potentially always going to be defined at this point. You know, actually, I'm going to change my mind on all this. Okay, I'm just going to put an exclamation mark at the end of this for right now. And then I'm also going to refactor this a little bit to say items. And this will say item.name. Let's go ahead and save this. And hopefully this will be good. Again, the whole reason we're doing this is so when someone wants to post an item, so I just go and say shoes and click post. If I go and check the database, if I go to item now, notice that we have the user ID. And so what this allows us to do is now we can start having like a custom dashboard for a user and fetch all of the items that they have put up for bidding. And it's just good to have this stuff associated with your records. So at this point, I think let's go ahead and commit what we have. I'm going to go ahead and just say, you know, we added in Next.auth. So let's say add in Next.auth and items table. Go ahead and commit that. So I think we should try to add a header here and make this look more like a real application, because right now it's looking like a prototype, right? So let's go to the layout here, and we're going to go ahead and try to add a header above all of the children that we render out. I'm going to go ahead and just pretend like we have a header. We haven't made one yet, but we're going to make one now. And I like to put my components co-located, so if the header is only used in one place, I'd probably have the header file live next to the layout. That's the approach I use, but you're welcome to do whatever approach that you want. Let's do an export function header. Just return a div for right now. And over here, I'm going to auto import that header. Okay. And inside the header, what we want to do is we're going to add a container. And inside of this div, I'm going to go ahead and say BG gray of 50. And the reason I'm adding the container is so that, again, when you're at a larger screen, like stuff will scale properly. So on the left, we want to kind of create a logo and display it. And I'm going to make a div here, and that will have an image. Bring in next image. I'm going to say /logo.png. Width can be like 50, I guess. Okay, that should be pretty good. And then over here, I'm going to go ahead and say bidbuddy.com. Let's just pretend we have a website like this. And we're going to go ahead and just give this a flex. The item center, we'll say gap of 2. Now let's go look at how this is looking. Okay, not too bad. I'd probably make the header a little bit darker. So let's say gray of 100. There you go. And then also we could give this some padding Y of 4. Okay. Maybe even make this gray of 200 so it's more apparent. And then on the right side, we could actually show a logout button. So instead of just showing nothing here, we're going to move this sign out button. We're going to move it into the header. So let's go back to the page, find the sign out button, which was this one. And we could probably actually just copy this whole logic. So let's go to the header here. I want to make another div. I'm going to put that logic in. I'm going to import this and import that. And then for session, we need to go here and say const session is equal to await auth, I believe. Actually, how do we do it over here? Yeah, we were doing await auth, but we need to put an async here for this to work. And then auto import that. So notice that this is getting put underneath this logo and the text, not what we want. What we actually want to do is we want to change this thing to have a flex, and we'll say space between, so that it'll push the buttons all the way to the right. In fact, it's not doing that. I think, oh, it's not space between. It's called justify between. There you go. Now we got sign out over here. And if we clicked it, it would change to a sign in button. Probably reduce the gap over here a little bit. I think gap of 2 is a little bit too big. Do gap of 1. There you have it. Now, secondly, when you click on this logo, typically the approach is you should have it redirect. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a link like this. And then we're going to go ahead and just give this a an href of the home page. We'll give it a class name too. We can say text underline. On a hover, I think we can just do that. There. So now we should be able to hover over that and it becomes underlined. Again, we kind of lost all the styling here. So we're actually going to move this directly into that class here. We don't need a div anymore. And of course, you can just keep playing around with this. Like padding of 4 might be too much. Do padding of 2. And that probably needs to also be item center. So like over here, we could say item center. So some more cleanup. Let's go to the page and let's get rid of that sign in and sign out button. Also get rid of our name, because we can actually in the header we could just put that name. So like I'll go over here and next to the sign in sign out button, this could be its own div potentially. And then over here we can have another div that's going to have session.user.name. Put some question marks here. And then my name will pop up. And then again, we want to get this all in one line. So we could probably just give it a class name of flex, item center, gap of 2. Now I'll do a gap of 4. Okay, pretty good. And let's go ahead and focus on this form. So like we probably need an H1 on this page. So over here, I'm going to say H1. I'll say class name is text of 4XL, font of bold. And then I'm going to go ahead and say post and item to cell. So this form, I think we can just style it a little bit and make it look a little bit better. I'm going to give it a border. I'm going to give it some padding. I'm going to give it some rounding. And then we should have a nice little rounded section here. I think padding of 4 is too small. And this could probably be an extra large. And then secondly, we should probably give this a space Y of 4 or something. Okay, and then we should probably also give it like a max width of the input. So on the input itself, we can say class name is equal to max width of medium. That'll make it so it doesn't scale so large. And then secondly, this spanning all the way, we can fix this by just putting a W fit on this. So I can say W fit. That should scale it down. And that'll only contain the necessary width of the item that we're trying to, like, it contains, right? Actually, let me swap this. I'm going to put the max width here instead of fit. Okay, that looks a little bit better. And then underneath the H1, again, we could just do some margin bottom. Or if you're a fan of doing like space Y, you can do that as well. Go ahead and just like space these things out. And yeah, so now we have like the ability for user to come in here and post a new item. But then we also probably want to show all the items that are currently forbidding. So I'm going to go ahead and put an H2 here. Give it a class name. I'll say text of 2XL. We do font and bold as well. And then save that. I'm going to say items listed. Or items for sale. This button, I'm probably going to move over. So like instead of it being there, I'm going to give it a class name. And I'll say self end. That should push it to the end, hopefully. It did not, and that's probably because this thing needs a flex column on it. There we go. Now I plan to add probably more stuff here, like how much does your item cost? What's the starting bid? We have the name. We need to come in and add some validation to this, but I'm just trying to slowly evolve this application to make it look nice. And for the items for sale, again, we could probably do some type of cards over here. So let's just go ahead and make this have a class name. say border, we could say padding of 4 or maybe 8. And then we'll say rounded extra large. Save that. And wrapping this whole thing, I'm going to go ahead and say grid. I'm going to say grid calls 4. And I'm going to move this div down. Okay, so that we'll have like, as we add more items, so like testing another item, what is up, another test. Do that a couple times. We probably want to add some gap between these cards, right? So let's just go back and we're going to go ahead and just put a gap of 4 between these cards and make sure that's enough. Maybe even an 8. I just realized my head was hiding my name and my sign out button that showed up over here. So this is what it looks like in case you missed that part. So I will say at some point, like you have to kind of reevaluate what you're building and try to understand from a user's perspective, what is the most important thing for a user who comes onto the site? Is it viewing items for sale or is it placing new bid items? And I would assume that you want to find items to bid on. That's your number one concern. So if that is the concern, maybe we should move this to its own page. So let's go ahead and make a new page here. We haven't made another page, but with the Next.js app router, you can make a page and we can just call one, we'll call it create bid, like that. You could also do bid/create if you want to. Maybe that's another approach we can do. Is it bid/create? Whatever way works. And inside of this bid/create page, let's make a page.tsx. And we want to move a lot of the stuff that we had over here with this form. So I'll just copy the whole page. I'm going to paste it in here. And I'm going to go ahead and just refactor a little bit. Okay, we don't need the sign in and sign out button. We don't need the session stuff just yet. Really, we just want like a container. We can say post an item. Keep the form, but the items for sale can all go away. Okay, and then the logic for the action would stay the same. Now I'm going to go ahead and refactor this out. Like I said, I like to have an actions file. So I'm going to go ahead and say action.ts. Sorry, I forgot the S. So actions. Oops. And then I'm going to say use server, and then we're going to go ahead and extract away this server action here. We'll say export async function. Sorry, I'll call it create item. And then we're going to go ahead and just like take form data that was previously there. And we're going to go ahead and just make sure we import what we need. All right. Go. Now we do need the session, so let's just go ahead and say const session is equal to await auth. Make sure we import that. And then we want to add some authentication checks. So if there is no session, we definitely want to throw an error. We'll do that. And that should help us know if someone's trying to hit this endpoint without permission. I'm going to go ahead and add an action suffix to this. This is how I like to name my actions. And at this point, session should be defined. We should probably get the user as well. And then if the user is not defined for some reason, I don't know why it wouldn't be defined, but we can throw an error so that we can kind of get rid of that. Then we can do this. And then also if there is no user ID. So if there is no user.id, I think we can do that. That should make that happy. Let's go back to our create page, and instead of doing all this stuff inline, and just call the action directly here, and then we can go ahead and clean up some of this code. So again, we have a new page. So if we were to go up here and say bids/create, in fact, I don't know why I called it bids. It's more of an item, so I can go ahead and just rename that to items. So now on the home page, we should probably get rid of this. Go back to the main page. We're going to delete the form in the H1. And we're actually going to rename this to items for sale. This. Okay. But how do we get to creating a new item? Well, there's a couple of ways. We could probably have something in the header here. So let's just go ahead and try that. Let's go to the header we created. We're going to add a link. So let's just copy this link here. And then we're going to go ahead and just put this link. Where should we put the link? I want it to be like right here. The way we could potentially do that is we probably want to wrap this whole thing in a div. Go ahead and just drag that down. And then that could be a link over here. and then we're going to go ahead and just get rid of the image. Let's call this auction item. And then let's save this. That should show up somewhere. And if you click it, we want to go to items/create. So that if I click on this, we should go to the items create page. Okay, so now we can navigate between these pages, which is pretty nice. Again, we want to get this on the same line. So we could just go ahead and say like class name, flex, item center, gap of 8. And then I'm going to wrap this in a div as well in case we have like multiple items. Okay. In fact, I might do a gap of 12 instead. Okay. Auction in item might be better. Now we can go back. So I think there's a couple things I want to add to posting an item. And that is we want to have a starting bid price. Let's go to our items page. And inside of this form, we probably want to add another input. We'll call this start price. And what to start your auction at. And I think this could be a type of number. There might be a way to like do some decimal places maybe. There's a way to like limit it to only have 2. But for right now, we'll stick with this, 243. And then when we submit this, I'm going to make these both required for right now. So I'll say required and go ahead and save this. But now what we want to do is we want to track that item, okay, the start price. I think calling it starting price would be a little bit better, starting price. So let's pretend like we have starting price on that, because right now we don't. So we'll have to go back to our schema and find our item. We'll have to give it a starting price, make it an integer. Awesome. And then let's go ahead and run a db push. This. Sometimes when you try to add data to Drizzle, it's going to ask you to basically truncate a column or truncate a table. And when this happens, it's because if you read this, you're trying to add a column that doesn't have a default value. And Drizzle's default thing is just like delete your table and recreate it. We're going to cancel because we don't want it to delete all the existing items that we have, especially if you're doing this in production. You might have thousands of items. You don't want to just delete all of them. So we are going to say default. And we can just default it to 0 or something, so that when we actually try to run that, it doesn't delete everything. And that's typically the best approach forward, is make sure you give a default to all your new columns if you can. And then if you need to, you can write a script to come in and actually like populate them with the real values. Okay, so now our action should persist that. Let's go back to our form. I'm going to go ahead and say like some shoes. $2.99 will be the starting auction, or you could do $3. Just go ahead and post the item. And after we've successfully posted the item, we should probably redirect back to the main items page or something. So let's go, instead of saying revalidate path, I'm going to say redirect. And we're going to go to the home page. Okay, you don't need to revalidate the path anymore. You just redirect back to the home page. So I click it. There we go. Now we already have 2 shoes. I don't know which one was like the one that we're doing. So I'm going to say pencil. That'd be $2.99 as a start price. Please enter a valid value. The 2 nearest valid values are 2 and 3. I think we can actually say type as a decimal here. I forget how you do that. Type number, min of 1, step any. Actually, I'm going to do a step of that. That should be pretty cool. Let's try this. If I submit this, there we go. Invalid input syntax for type integer, $2.99. So the issue is that when we save this, this is coming over as a string, I believe. And then we're trying to cast it to a number. So we actually probably need to say parse float. And this is going to be a string. And let's try this again. I'm going to go ahead and just say whatever, $1.99, save it. And that's actually still not working. So let's just debug this a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and say like starting price is equal to that. I need to figure out what this is. Is this a string or is this something else? Let's just go ahead and say console log type of starting price. And let's see what gets printed out when we do $2.99. Go to our console down here, and we should see that it is a string. Okay, and the issue is because we're trying to store an integer when really this should be like a number or a float. Yeah, I don't know if Postgres has that. So another approach that I've seen a lot of systems do is you do keep it as integer. But what you do is if someone sends over $2.99, you actually convert that to like currency. I'm gonna say as string, and then I'm gonna say const price as cents, and then let GPT do that for us. Well, I need the math.floor this. And then we're gonna go ahead and just store price as cents over here. And hopefully this works. I mean, at some point we're gonna bring like Zod and do some real validation here, but now we should be able to save this. Go back to Drizzle. Let's go to items and refresh this. And one of these should have a starting price of $2.99. So basically just store the cent value. Don't store floats. So you don't have any type of like floating point issues or rounding issues. Just store the whole number there. And then later in the UI, if you want to format it, you could just divide by 100 to show a decimal. Yeah, so at this point, what we could probably do is on all these items, let's display what the starting bid is. So let's go back to the page here. And actually, no, what page do we need to go to? Let's go over here to this page. And then what we need to do is also display the starting price. So I'm going to say starting price, and then we'll say item dot starting price. And again, you can divide by 100. That might give you some really weird, not a number stuff. I'm not sure why that's doing that. Sometimes you actually need to restart your Next server when you do database migrations, because it doesn't like know how to figure out the numbers. There we go. Yeah, I just had to restart Next, and now it's working. Now, obviously, we could do more formatting, make this look pretty. You know, probably put like a money sign in front of this. Go. Now it looks a little bit better. But for right now, let's just go ahead and commit what we have. We've done a lot of changes. I'm gonna go ahead and just say like adding a header. Let's add all these changes. I'm gonna say add header, and then I'm gonna say create item page factor homepage. So I think it'd be really important to be able to allow users to upload images for the items they're trying to auction. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, where I like to host images is on R2. You can also use S3 if you want to. And once you've made an account, you can come down and go to R2 over here. And I'm going to create a new bucket. I'm going to call this bid buddy. Go ahead and click create bucket. And R2 is just a file storage location, right? It has the same interface as S3. And so you can actually just upload images directly to the bucket from your UI. So now that we have the bucket, let's go to settings. And what we need to do is we need to go down, actually let's go back to R2 over here, and let's go to manage my API token. So let's go and create a new API token. And I'm gonna call this bid buddy. And I wanna make sure we have the ability to read and write from that bucket. So let's click on that one. And then let's go ahead and only allow this key to be used for the bid buddy bucket. Go ahead and create that API key. And now we can go down. We have an access key ID, and we also have a secret access key. We're going to need both of those. And we're also going to need this ID that's in our Cloudflare. This is our Cloudflare account ID. So if you go to this documentation here, you can use a AWS SDK client to basically upload images to this bucket. So we're going to go ahead and install this. Go back to our code, make sure that we can install that, npm install this, and then also we want to install this pre-signer library. So while those are installing, let's go ahead and just create a new file over here inside of our lib directory. So I'm going to go to source, I'm going to go to lib, and I'm going to say s3.ts. And we want to basically copy, we can actually just copy all this right now. Copy all of this, and we're going to delete some of the comments that they have. We don't need any of these comments. Delete that. Delete this. And in order to upload to this bucket, we have to make sure we have certain environment variables set. So we need an account ID, we need an access key ID, and we need a secret access key. Let's go to the env file that we have. And I want to make sure that I have all these things set. And I am going to put Cloudflare account ID, this, and then we also want access key ID, that, and then also secret access key. So I'll go ahead and do this. And then over here, I can just make sure I pull those in. Let Copilot kind of do all the work for me. And then go back to this file. Let's go ahead and import that env package like this. And we want Cloudflare account ID. We want env.cloudflare access key ID and Cloudflare secret access key. Okay, so that's how you can set up the client that can connect to the bucket. I'm going to rename this to S3 client. And now we want a function to be able to upload an image to the bucket. So I'm going to say export function get signed URL. Here we go. This probably works fine. And then we can just go ahead and go back over here. I think they have an example. If you scroll down, we need to do this one, the put item command. So let's just go ahead and run that. And I'm going to return this. And I'll say S3 client, delete the rest. Okay, so this is a function that basically creates a URL that only lasts for an hour, and you give it to your clients, and your clients can upload a file with a certain key to a bucket. So we also want a bucket name. So I'm going to say .env.bucket name. Go back to that env file over there, and I'm going to go ahead and just add a bucket name. And for our bucket name, we're going to do bid buddy, because that is a bucket that we created. Okay. And then finally, let's go over here. We'll put a key so that we can call this function, pass it whatever key we want, and that should give us the ability to upload to it. Okay, so all of this was so that we can go back to our app, and in this post and item page, we want to add like a file input to allow a user to select the file and then upload directly to this bucket. So let's go here. I'll add another input, and we'll call this type of file, and then we'll give it a name of file. Go ahead and save that. We should see a file pop up over here. And you know what? I forgot to add in the other environment variables. So let's go back. We need to add in the Cloudflare access key ID. So Cloudflare access key ID is equal to this. Cloudflare secret access key is going to be equal to this one. And then we need a Cloudflare account ID, which was up here in the URL. You can just copy this, paste it in, save it, and hopefully that's everything we need. All right, so now we have a file that's popping up, and we can go ahead and just put my name or put an item. Let's say shoes again. We'll say 199, and we're going to select a file from my computer. So I selected that bg.jpg. So going to this action, if we want to get the file, let's just try getting the file out from the form data like this. And I'm going to console log it and see if we have access to it. All right, so we're console logging the file here. Let's go ahead and just click this. And let's see if we get the file back. So over here, you see we do have a file. And I think we could actually upload that directly to our bucket. There are some limitations with doing the file uploads directly from an action. I think there's like a 6 megabyte limit or something like that. I have to go and read the documentation. I think this is also experimental. So that function we added here to get the pre-signed post, we don't necessarily need it if the file is already sent over to our backend. But we're going to kind of change our implementation because for larger files, like you don't want to do this in a form action. So let's go over here and we're going to kind of modify this a little bit. I'm going to say use client. I'm going to get rid of the async for right now. And instead of calling an action here, we're going to say on submit. And then we're going to pass this a callback function. And we're going to say e.prevent default so that it doesn't submit the form. And then we want to call the server action at some point. We're going to go ahead and bring in a form like this. We're going to get form data like this. And then we can actually just pass in form data directly, form data. Okay, so this is working exactly how it did before, but now it's a client component. And we should probably actually do like an await on here. But the main difference is we want to upload the file from the user's browser to that bucket, because that's going to save on bandwidth. Instead of that file have to go through our Next.js server, and then our Next.js server has to again upload the same file to a bucket. Why not just cut out the middleman and upload directly to the bucket itself? So I'm gonna go ahead and say like get the upload URL, and we can simply call an action, which we'll probably have to create another action for this. So I'm gonna go over here and say export async create upload URL, and this needs to take in a key. And then we're going to go ahead and just return await get signed URL for S3 object like this. And that should hopefully return us back a URL we can use to do a multi-part upload. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to have action at the end so it's more apparent. And then we're going to call it like this. We can say file, which we haven't grabbed from the form, so we can just go ahead and do that. And then I'll say file dot name. That could be the name for our key that we're storing in the bucket. And now we want to upload that. So you just do a fetch request, you pass it that upload URL, and I believe you can just pass it. I don't think you just pass it the body. I think you need to make another form data. So I'll say upload form data is equal to this, and then we're going to add the file, and then we're going to say upload form data here. Let's comment this one out. I'm going to try this out. I know there's a lot of information coming your way if you're watching this video, but this is all important stuff. You have to upload files somewhere, and typically most people in production size, large scale applications are going to be using S3 or R2 or some type of distributed file storage. Let's go back over here, type in some information, grab an image, go ahead and click post image, and we did get a CORS issue. So when you're trying to upload to R2, you do need to go through and update some CORS access. So let's go to R2. Let's go to bid buddy settings. Let's go to the add CORS policy. And we're going to go ahead and add one for post. Also add one for put. And then we could simply add, I think for allowed headers, I'm going to say content type. And then for exposed headers, we're going to keep that blank for right now. This should hopefully work. Let's just save this and let's see. Now it can take up to 30 seconds for this change to propagate to your bucket. So give it some time. Let's just live on the edge and try it again without waiting. Go ahead and click this and notice that it does seem like it's doing something now. I think it ran. I just don't have the redirect happening anymore because I commented out. So let's go back to our bucket and let's check. So I can go to objects here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just do a hard refresh on this page, because for some reason the refresh button is not visible, but you can see that it has our image now. So we can click on this and we could potentially download it if we want to and look at it, but it does have our image, which is pretty cool. Go over here, click download. Here we go. Now, one thing we typically do when we upload images is that we want to actually attach a content type, because right now the backend doesn't know, is this an image? So let's go back to our create upload URL action, and we also want to pass in the content type. I think it's just type. And then let's go here. I'm going to pass in type. That's going to be a string. That's going to take in a type. Over here, we have the type now. So the type string. And then we basically want to pass that in. Like we can say content type and just set it. Okay, so now next time we upload the file, it's going to also pass in the content type. Because right now, if you look at the object, it says multi-part form data. Not what we want, I don't think. So let's delete that. I think there's something we're missing here. I think maybe here we need to add headers. Let's try this. Let's try it one more time. Click post item, refresh this. Okay, there we go. Now it says image JPEG, so we're cooking. So let's go ahead and click on download it. It should show now, hopefully. Okay, so we verified it is getting stored, and it does have a content type over here. Image/JPEG, which is good. So now let's see if after we submit this, we need to store it to the database, and we probably also want to store the key of the item. So let's go ahead and bring this one back. Now, since we're not doing like a form action anymore, I'm actually going to refactor this action to just take in what it needs instead of form data. So it could take in a file name, be a string, It could take in a name, which would be a string, and then also a starting price, which would be a number. And I'm going to wrap these in an object argument. Go ahead and pull those out. Starting price, there we go. And then down here, we don't need form anymore. We can get rid of any access to form. We don't need starting price from the form. This should already be a number. So we should just be able to like use whatever they pass in. Delete this, and then we want to store the file name or the key. I'll just say file key is equal to file name because we are kind of using the same key that was passed in. And this should be good. We do need to update the schema again. So let's go to schema. Let's go to items. I'm going to say file key. That's going to be a text. That's not null. It is required. And of course, every time you change your schema, go down here. You say npm run db push. I should apply the changes. This will truncate the data because I said not null. So I am just going to run the truncate. That's fine. We'll lose our data. But now we can come in here. We can actually just pass in the things that we had prior. So we have like the name from the form. We have the starting price, which I think what we should be doing again is math.flooring this, timesing it by 100. And this should be a parse int. I think I have some type of syntax error somewhere. So I think sometimes it's easier just like pull the stuff out. Okay, just do that. Pull all this stuff out. Okay. So let's try this again. Let's go ahead and say like super shoes $2.99. Let's go ahead and select an image and I'll click post. That should upload the image and then it should create the entry. And now if we go back to Drizzle and go to our items, we should be able to see that now we have a file name somewhere. I might have to do a hard refresh on this. Here it is. File name is BG of JPEG. And so now on this page, that should come back and we can use that file key to display the image right here where we are showing these cards, right? So let's try doing that. Let's go back to our main page. And over here, let's just go ahead and display an image. It'll be a source pointed to item.fileKey. Do alt with there you go. Now this won't load because we actually need to get the location from the R2 bucket. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a function up here called like get image URL. And that's gonna take in a file key as a string. And then we're gonna return our bucket name, which at this point we don't really have a URL. So we're gonna go to settings over here. We're gonna use the R2 dev domain. Technically, if you wanted to set up a custom domain, you should probably do that because there are some limitations with this like custom bucket. So I'm going to grab this whole URL and then I'm going to click allow access. And so now people should be able to kind of show these images inside their UI. So again, let's just go ahead and put this here for right now. I'm going to hard code it. And that is our bucket. And now we're going to say file key here and just append that key. So hopefully this works. I'm going to go ahead and just call that here. So it is saying undefined. So I'm wondering if I just need to restart Next.js. Remember, whenever you do a migration for some reason in Drizzle, you have to restart your Next server or else it can't seem to get the data back and map it properly. Some internal thing going on there. So now it's saying invalid source prop. It's trying to access the image on this URL, but you have to kind of give Next.js access to a subdomain. So let's copy this subdomain. Let's go to next config. And then over here, we're going to say images. And then I think we can say remote patterns or remote, I think it's remote patterns. Here it is. And then we're going to go ahead and just say like host name is this. What other options do we have? Path name. Okay. We have port and protocol. We'll say HTTPS. Path name will be star We want to access any type of images from there. And port, I think we can just leave port blank. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. And we should see the image show up, hopefully. Okay, I must have it misconfigured. So let's go over here and try to figure this out. For port, they leave it blank. Path name, host name, HTTPS. I mean, this all seems fine. Add port in here. All right, so a little bit of debugging. Let's try to figure out what's going on. So we just set this bucket to publicly accessible. And what we're trying to do is figure out, like, why can't we display this image? So let's go back to the objects here. I'm going to try to manually upload an object from my computer. I want to see if maybe our application is just not correctly doing this. Starterkit.png. Okay, let's try that. Let's go to that URL. I'll say starterkit.png. Okay, so that works. Awesome. I'm going to take this URL. I want to make sure that I can hard code this into my page. So let's just return this entire URL for right now. Okay, and go back to our app. By getting rid of path name, maybe you don't need to put a path name there. Okay, there you go. I guess you don't need a path name. Cool. So this works. It can show an image, and remember, this is coming from our bucket. Pretty awesome. But I think there's an issue with the bg.jpg. So if I were to switch it back to the old approach, so like this, I think this won't show the image properly, and I'm not sure why, because also when I try to download the image from here, it says that there's something wrong with the image. So I think we're almost there. We just got to figure out, like, what is going on when we try to upload this thing to our bucket. So let's figure out where we're calling this. So create upload action. We pass in the key in the type, and that should give us back a URL, which we get back here. So I think actually, you can just put the file here. I think I'm just confusing some stuff. So we don't need to get another form. We're just going to go ahead and upload the file. Go back and try it again. So I'm going to go to auction and item. And then we're going to go ahead and just type in some stuff. Make sure we select that background. Click post item. There you go. So now it's working. It's displaying those images correctly. All right, so we successfully uploaded and also displayed the images from the bucket we created. A little bit of snags along the way, but that's programming for you. Hopefully you learned a little bit from watching me try to debug this. And then we could probably style this up a little bit, like just make this look a little bit better, because right now it doesn't look too good. So we could probably go to this page here, and somewhere we are displaying the cards. Let's go back to this page actually. Do a little bit of cleanup. This could probably come from an environment variable. So let's do this, and I'll call it bucket URL. And this needs to be next public bucket URL, like this. In fact, let's just go ahead and put the HTTPS in front of it too. And this is the first time that we've done like a public environment variable. So let's go here, and then we're going to go into the client, and we'll say next public bucket URL is equal to the string, and then we're going to go ahead and just do that. And so that we have it defined in an environment variable. So if you're following along in your tutorial, you can simply just reference it, as yours is going to be different from mine more than likely. And import that. Go ahead and delete some of this unused code. And I would think this will be better in a utility function. So let's just go ahead and cut this out. Let's go to lib. Actually, no, let's go to source, and I'm going to make a util. Then I'm going to make one called files. Files.ts. Go ahead and paste that in. Import this. And now, in case we need to use that anywhere else in our application, we have a shared location we can import that from. Okay, so sometimes in React, you have these smaller components that you want to kind of componentize. So like a good rule of thumb is if you see a map, you could probably take this out and make it into a component. So I can go over here, and you can sometimes put it in a different file if you want to. So like we could potentially make a card called item card.tsx. We're going to say export function item card. We're going to return that JSX, and then we're going to import whatever we need to make this work. Import that. This needs to take in an item. And again, we have item that comes from the database. So I don't think I've shown you how you can do this, but if you go to Schema, when you have your table object defined, you can actually export a type. So I can just call it item is equal to type of, and I can say items dot infer select. So now, if you want to kind of use that same data structure in your Typescript throughout your code base, you can just import that, and it'll work pretty good. Let's take this item card and let's go back to our main page, and let's go ahead and just kind of replace this with a key here, the item.id, and then we'll pass in the item, and all this stuff can just kind of go away. And then make sure we import this. Okay, so the code's a little bit cleaner now, and now what this allows you to do is you have kind of a nice separation of like, okay, I just need to update the item card. Well, here it is. It's all in this file, and it's a little bit easier to maintain. And the reason I did this is I wanted to put the title here, maybe in bold. So here, this could be like an H2, and we'll put the item name here. And we're going to say class name, text extra large, font bold. Here we go. Probably also put some space Y of 2 between these items. And then over here we have the paragraph tag that describes what this is. You can go ahead and just say this is going to be text large. And here we go. Let's go ahead and delete some of this stuff. We can bring it back if we end up needing it. And then let's go ahead and commit. So we just added the ability to upload to R2. I'm going to say adding ability to upload files to R2. All right, let's try to add some more functionality. So as a user, if you were to create an auction, like try to sell an item, at some point people need to come in and bid on your item. And so there's 2 ways that we can go. We could try to add the bid functionality, or we could add a page where you can view your current items that are for auction. Let's start with the a page that shows like what items that you have put up for auction. So I'll just go ahead and make another link here. I'll say my auctions, and then I'll just go ahead and say auctions, I guess. Then let's go up here to the app directory. I'm going to say auctions. I'm going to make a page, page.tsx, and let's just go ahead and grab this, I guess. You know, actually, I think it'll look very similar to our main page. Let's grab this, and I'm going to paste this in, and I'll say my auction page. Okay, so the idea is that if you click on my auctions, it should take you to this page, and it's going to show you only your auction items. Right now, there's the main page that shows every single auction in our system, but there's also my auctions, which should just show you yours. Let's go ahead and fix up the styling a little bit. We want to give this a flex, item center, gap of 4, but they're spaced out, maybe even more, gap of 8. And while we're at it, we might as well just add a link for like everything. So like, let's just go here. I'll say all auctions. And that'll just take us back to the home page. I might rename this a create auction. There we go. So now we can kind of navigate between these things. Okay, so let's go back to the My Auctions page. What are we trying to do? We want to only return the items that are associated with the currently logged in user. Okay, so there is a way to do a query here with Drizzle. We can do items, find many, and then we want to pass this a where clause. So I'll say where, and then here's how you can do it with Drizzle. You pull in this EQ, and then you say items dot. Remember, items is that like database schema definition. We want to find the items where the user.id is equal to user ID. Now we don't have user ID right now, but we can get it if I say const session is equal to await auth. And then I'm going to go ahead and say if there is no session, then we should probably like return nothing or throw an error. If there is no session dot user, should probably throw an error. And I think I can just do this in one line, hopefully. Then over here, I'm going to say session.user.id. Okay, go ahead and auto import this. And this is probably going to complain because it doesn't think that there's a user ID on that for some reason. Okay, so now this is still going to show the same data as last time, but if I were to log out and sign in as someone else, I'm not sure why that just crashed. I think in the header, we do sign out. What we probably need to do is give it a callback URL. So callback, let's go to sign out over here. Go to our sign out button, and I believe we can just give this like a callback URL. Let's just do a redirect to and give it a slash, because that wasn't supposed to crash our app when we signed out. So let's test that out, make sure we didn't break anything. Go back to my auctions, click sign out, and there we go. We got redirected back to the home page and we didn't have the app crash. Let's sign in as someone else. Then my other email, click continue. So now we have 2 users in our system. And now if I go to my auctions, you'll notice that nothing shows up for my own items. Now I think it'd be convenient if we had a button over here where someone could just create an auction if they don't have one. I know we have create auction up here, but it would be nice if they go to their items and like we have some type of placeholder state that says like, hey, you don't have any auctions available. So I like using undraw for like some not found illustrations. Let's just go ahead and say like 404. And let's see if there's any type of like not found illustrations we can use. Say not found, how about that? Or let's search package. Maybe there's an image with like a package. Yeah, let's just download this one. It looks pretty good. So download the SVG and let's just put it in our project. Okay, so now we have an SVG called package SVG. And on any pages where like a user doesn't have items, I find it really beneficial to have like an empty state type of view. So let's just go ahead and say like empty state, ESX, and then we're going to say export function empty state. And then we're going to return a div that has that image that we just brought in. So let's do image. We'll say source package SVG, width of like, I don't know, 200, height of 200, alt could be a package, okay. And then we're going to go ahead and say H2, you have no auctions yet. We'll add a button that's going to basically ask them create auction. All right, we'll say as child, and we're going to go ahead and just say link, say href, and then we're going to say items create. I think is the path I created. All right, so now we can use this empty state object and we can put it here if there's no items. So let's just make a Boolean that says has items. And if the length is greater than 0, we can just go ahead and show this mapping. Otherwise, we can show empty state like this. So let's just go ahead and pull this in. And I'm going to put this in a fragment so it doesn't complain. And then we should import empty state over here. Awesome. So this is the empty state placeholder. I'm going to go ahead and just put this full screen. We have no auction items yet. So let's just style this a little bit. In here, I'm going to say class name. We're going to say space Y of 8. Here, we can say class name of text to XL font bold. And then for the button itself, I think it should be fine. Now we do want to give this maybe flex column, item center. Okay. Maybe even a justify center as well. Let's see if this will pull it to the center of the screen. Oh, I put this, so notice that this is in a grid and it doesn't need to be in a grid. So let's go ahead and move this out of the grid. So I'm actually going to pull this up one and then I'm going to pull that down one over here. I'm going to screw up all this stuff. Get rid of that. And there we go. Cool. So now it says you have no auctions yet. Creating auctions should take you back to post an item. And then instead of saying items for sale here, let's just go ahead and say your current auctions. Save this. And we could do some more styling to like center this if you have nothing. There's some stuff I would probably clean up with this, but I think it's a good start. So what are we trying to do? Basically, if I were to go here and create an auction for myself, so shoes, $199. And again, let's just pick like, go ahead and grab some shoes and put them in here. And I'll go ahead and upload those. Those shoes should pop up. And if I go to my auctions, you'll see that my shoe is right there. And we also have all the different auctions that are currently happening. So at this point, it would be nice if we could actually allow people to bid on other people's items, right? So like, let's add a button here where you can click on it and you can actually start bidding on this. So let's go to the card. And then let's add a button here. Go ahead and import this and I'll say bid on item. Okay, here we go. And now the question I want to ask is, should we go to a new page? We probably should. So let's go ahead and just make this a link as well. Say as child, we'll say link. You know, instead of typing this all out by hand, just go to empty state, grab something we already have, paste it in, and then we'll say items. We'll say place bid here, bring that in. And we want to go to the actual item that we're clicking on. So like we have to convert this string interpolation, and we'll say item.id. And that should be good enough. So when we click place bid, it'll take us directly to the item, which we don't have a route for this. Items 11, so we'll have to make a route. We'll say items, and then we're going to make a new folder called item ID. This is how you can do like path parameters in Next.js. You do these brackets, and then you can use that bracket, whatever is inside of it, you can pull that out in your route and use it to do a query against your database. So let's say page.tsx, and I'm going to grab an existing, change that to item. I'll call this an item page. And then we're going to go ahead and save this. So I think on this page, let's go ahead and try to get some of the same information displayed here, like the picture of the item and also the name and stuff like that. So on the item page, go over here, we can get rid of the use client and we can just put an async here, and we could fetch the information for this item. So I'm going to say const item is equal to await, and I think we can bring in database. Again, let's just import database. I don't know why this isn't auto importing for some reason in my project, but I have to keep doing that manually for some reason. And then we'll say database dot query dot items dot find first, and then we want items dot id is equal to an ID that we're going to get from here. So in Next.js, to get these props, like this item ID from props, you can go ahead and just do this, and we can say params, and then here we can say item ID. Okay, and that should be able to allow us to do this and get the item ID. Go ahead and auto import that as well. Okay, and then we need to type this. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put a type here, and then let Copilot do the rest for me. All right, so that should get the item, so that when we load this page, we can actually display the name of the item. So now it's actually being displayed, and there's a couple things we need to do to cast this. So right now I think item ID actually is a number. So like we'll have to say parse int on that to make it a number. And then I don't like how there's a chain here, like an optional chaining. I think I'd rather say if there is no item, what we could do is we could return a different view. So like I could just say item not found. Just in case someone were to like type in the wrong item here, it should say item not found. At least it should have. I'm not sure why it's not doing that right now. Oh, I didn't return. Let's go ahead and return. Now it should say item not found, and we could style this a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. Now, one thing that you'll notice on all the pages is that like this is not really brought in. Like we should probably wrap this in a container. So I'm going to go to the layout and just wrap everything for right now. So wherever we render out these children for all the pages, let's just wrap this in a container. Okay, so that's just like every page will have like a default indentation on the left and the right. We can also just give it some padding left and right too. And so now, like, if you go back to the main page, I think we're doing that same thing over here. So I'm going to get rid of that. And then anywhere else that we're doing stuff, like on the create page, we don't need to keep copying and pasting this everywhere because it is applied on the layout. And that'll just make the code a little bit more maintainable. Even the space Y, technically we could take that out, but you might not want to apply that to every single page. Go back over here, do a class name. I'll say text for Excel, font bold. There we go. Another thing that might be useful is that for all the H1s I have in all these different pages, you'll notice that I'm using the same type of styles for them, right? So at some point when you start seeing that there's a pattern of like, okay, I'm doing this in every single page, I would probably pull that out to like a styles file. So like you could put that in the app or the source directory. I'll just say styles.ts. And I'm going to go ahead and say export page title is equal to this string. And just have a little bit of tailwind there. Actually, I'm going to suffix with styles. Okay. So then everywhere else in our code base, just go ahead and import that style. This is one approach. The other approach is you can do a global class and apply some tailwind styles to that. Even the tailwind docs recommends that you don't use applies for some reason. The other approach is you can make a title component, but I sometimes feel like that just causes more complexity than necessary. So yeah, let's just go ahead and just add this to all of our titles on our page. Add it there. Add it there. By the way, those who watch my tutorials, you might feel like I'm jumping around, but this is honestly like how I like the code. As I'm kind of going through stuff, I see where I can improve some things, and I just improve it, right? So we could also do the same thing here. Go here, I'll put that right there. And now we don't need this question mark because we know that if it's not defined, we're going to go ahead and just return this item not found. So let's put a paragraph tag here, and I can say the item you are trying to view is invalid. Please go back and search for a different auction item. Okay, so we'll do like a paragraph tag, and then also we could do a button here. And again, let's just find like where we do buttons and links somewhere else. Here we go, good example. Let's go back over here, and we're going to put that button, save it. Awesome. We'll just go back to the main items page, I think is what we want. Unless we called it something else, I don't remember. I think it was called auctions maybe. So I'll just say like view auctions. And then also we could probably have like a placeholder image like we do over here. So it's a very similar approach that we do on like all the different like can't find placeholders. We're going to do this. Oh, that's the wrong one. I think somewhere else we had like a placeholder image, didn't we? Like when something's loading. I feel like it was auctions. Oh, here it is, empty state. You just grab that image. Okay, so let's see. Item not found. The item I'm trying to find is invalid. Please go back and search. And you click view auctions. It should take you back. We should probably go back to the dashboard here. So we'll go ahead and do the dashboard. And all this, we should give it like a space 8y. Or sorry, space y8. Here we go. We give it a flex. We could say items center. Sorry, flex column as well. There we go. And then probably some padding top of 12, bring it down even more. Cool. So now that's the whole reason doing that is if like you went to a bad item. Let's say someone bookmarked a link and then someone else deleted that auction item. We want to show some type of graceful error state and not just let the page error out. So definitely keep that in mind when you're building out all these pages. Like what is the error state that could happen? Do you want to just redirect the user and not give them any indication of what happened, or do you want to actually show something like this? And I would recommend probably showing something like this. And I'm also going to put a break here so that these are on 2 different lines. And then we could just say text center here. Let's say text center. I'm not sure why that wasn't centering to begin with, but that looks better. Okay, so now if you click on something that is defined, it takes you to that item. Let's go back and let's focus on what we were originally trying to do. We got kind of sidetracked, but now the code is, I think, better and the application has a better user experience. I'm going to say auction for, and then we can say like, this is the item name. And we could technically wrap this in a span or something like this. And we'll say class name, font normal. There we go, auction for, and then in bold, it'll be the item that the person is trying to sell. Underneath this, we could basically just display an image of what the item is. And again, like, let's go back to the actual main page here and let's grab and the item card. Just grab this image. This, always good to reuse code instead of like retyping out the same thing over and over again. So here's the image. Let's just do the shoe one because that's better. A couple of things we could do here is we make it larger. So we could give this like a 400 by 400. We could probably round this. So class name round extra large. Isn't it called round? Oh, it's called rounded extra large. There we go. Probably don't want to put this in the H1. That was a mistake. Let's move it out. So we got the item here. We got a picture of it. And then what we could do is we could have some information about the item here. And then the plan is over here, we could have the bids. Like if people are bidding on this, we could have that a historical list of bids and the current bid at the very top, maybe. So over here, we should probably put the item price. So we'll say like, make a div here. We'll say starting. Yeah, starting price of. And we'll say item dot starting price. There we go. Probably make this a little bit larger and also make this bold. So class name bold. Save that. And then we'll say class name text extra large here. Okay, so it's coming along. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff we could do to slowly improve this, and it does take time. Unless you have like a designer who's giving you everything from the get-go, the approach I would take if you're a web developer is just slowly iterate, try to make it better, try to think about like how would you restructure this to make it nicer. So over on the right, let's make a panel where people can start placing bids. And so I'm going to go ahead and just pretend like we have a panel over there. So the first thing we should probably do is get this to be split left and right. So over here, I can give this whole thing, I'm wrapping all of this in a div because this is like our left side panel. And then I'm going to wrap it in another div. And then we'll say class name flex. And that should push them left and right. And I can give it a gap of 8. And then over here, we'll do a div. And then we'll say like hello. So now we have like, if I collapse this, you'll see that we have all of this. Let me move this up. We'll have this on the left and then the hello will be on the right. Okay. So on the hello, probably do an H2 and I'll say like current bids. Keep saying bigs. Let's do bids. And then we could do an unordered list. And then we could basically, let's just prototype like we have some type of bids here. So I'm going to save this and we'll come up here and we'll say const bids is equal to, I'll make an array, and then we'll pretend like we have some data here. So we could probably do something like this where we have a bids array. It has how much the person bidded on that item. And it also has the username. I might just say username. Could probably even have like the user image too, or we could have the user ID. Depends on if you want to normalize or denormalize your data. So just for now, I'll just say bids here. Okay. For every bid, we're going to have a name. Here we go. Oh, we probably want a date too. So I'll go ahead and say like timestamp. We'll just do this. We'll just put dates in here for right now. And we could have those be displayed as well. Go ahead and copy this. We don't want font and bold here. So I'll just go ahead and say like timestamp. Now this might not render out because you'd have to like convert it. So I'll say to ISO string right now, but we're going to bring in like moment or some other library where we can actually format these and make it look nice. Okay, so now we have a list of bids. And again, this is like mocked out, but we should connect this to the Drizzle ORM soon enough and have that work. So I do want to format this date. So the one I like using is called date FSN, but there's a lot of different date libraries out there you could potentially use. Let's just copy date FSN. Or sorry, FNS, and go ahead and install that. And then once you have it installed, there is, if you go to the documentation, I think they tell you like some useful ways you can display like format distance. Yeah, so I'll do this one. Go ahead and just grab this. And I'm going to go ahead and just make a function up here called like format date. I'll say function format timestamp. We'll do this, but I'm actually just going to call that format distance function, which comes from date FNS. And then we will pass in timestamp, and then we'll also pass in the current date. So that's basically, it takes the difference between right now and then the timestamp that's on the record. And then we can use that to get a date string and display it. Let's go down here and we want to wrap this. Instead of using ISO string, we're going to go ahead and just do that. And yeah, let's go back to our app and let's see. So it says less than a minute ago. So I think if it's very old, if the bid is super old, it'll probably be at the bottom. We'll have to probably figure that out. But let's continue to clean this up a little bit and make it look nice. So current bids probably needs to be text of 2XL. We could font and bold it as well. And then the spacing between all this, we probably need to increase. So again, we can go here on this right panel, the space Y of 8. That'll move it down some. Maybe even 6 or 4. Okay, and then on this, we can give this a class name. We can say space Y of 4 as well. To kind of put some space in between these. And then over here, like we need to put some space in between the date and the name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into a div itself. And then the span here, I'm going to convert to a div. And then on this div itself, I'll say class name flex gap of 4. Cool. Let's just continue on. Maybe we can add some styling to this LI. I could say BG gray of 100. I'll say rounded XL. I'll say padding of 8. And that is what our bids are going to look like. I could type rounded correctly. There we go. And technically we can make this full width. So if we sometimes like if stuff's not expanding full width, get your little helper tool like this and we can hover over and try to figure out what is not expanding all the way. And so it looks like it's the second thing here. We need to probably add a flex grow to it. So the current bids, this right here, we could say flex 1, and that should expand it to the full width of whatever's left on the page. Now we got some auction for shoes. The spacing here got really tight for some reason. I'm not sure what happened to that. Probably because I wrapped it in a div. So let's go back over here. And this needs to be class name flex call gap of 6. There, add that spacing back. All right, so now we have like a scaffold of like the bid system, right? But like I said, remember the error states, remember the empty states. If someone were to create an auction from the get-go and there's no bid information on it, what is this page going to look like? Well, let's investigate that. Let's go here and I'm going to say comment all this out. And then I'm going to say const bids is equal to an empty array. So that is what your page is going to look like when there's no data. Not the best experience at all. Like this looks pretty bad. So again, we could probably add some type of placeholder state. And I'm going to go ahead and say like, it's nice to have booleans here that says like has bids is equal to the length of that. Just so you don't have like all this stuff sprinkled to your JSX. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say if we have bids. Okay, we'll just go ahead and do a ternary. We're going to take all of this UL stuff and we're going to go ahead and just put it there. Otherwise, we're going to do a div here and we'll say no bids yet. Save that. Again, like some placeholder image, which I don't think we've made public. So if we were to go over here to something, where do we have the placeholder? I think it was like on the auctions page. Here it is, empty state. Where is that being defined? It's over here. So we should be able to bring in this image. Yeah, let's just do that. So I'll go over here, I'll do that image, and then I'll do an H2. Now, one thing that's good to keep in mind in terms of accessibility is that you need to keep track of which H1s and H2s are on the page. You should only ever have one H1 on the page. For H2s, you should probably keep it to a minimum. But for screen readers, people who are tabbing through this, when they first load the page, it's going to go to an H1. And then as they step through, it's going to go to the next level, so H2. So logically, it makes sense to have this be like an H2 in case someone's using a screen reader and trying to step through some stuff. But this isn't a tutorial going to teach much about that, but it's good to keep that in mind. So let's make this a flex column. I'll say justify, I'll say item center. This. There we go. And again, we could probably like make this text of 2x, font bold, save that, and then also we could say like gap of 8 or something. And then we could have a button here that says like place a bid. Place a bid. Now the alignment here, I feel like this could be maybe aligned a little bit better. What we could probably do is just put this whole thing in a gray background wrapper just to give it a nice like, say BG100, rounded, extra large, padding of 12. And I think that looks a little bit nicer. Otherwise it just looks kind of weird that like it was off-centered. So when someone clicks this, we want to create a bid. We want to place a bid for them. Now, some bid systems that I've seen is that there'll be a starting price and then there'll be a interval that the auctioneer defines, right? So they could say the bids are by $5 or the bids are by $1. So I may actually try to add that in. Let's go back to the schema here and I'm going to go ahead and say like bid interval, if that's proper. I don't really do much auctions or bidding myself, but we could potentially say that it's like an interval of 1. Now again, this will be in cents, so maybe we should do $1. And again, that should be good. Let's just go ahead and run this. So I'll say npm run db push. That should apply it to our database. I'll click yes. And now we should have a bid interval that's attached to all of our data. So if we go down to where we had the starting bid that's displayed, what we could do is we could wrap this in a div, and then we're going to have a div down here that says bid interval, and then I will make this a interpolation item dot bid interval, and we will go ahead and wrap this in a span. So. And then I'm going to pull this stuff out, put it in there, and then I could say space y of 4. And now the bit interval is not there because I don't know. I think sometimes you do have to restart your next server whenever you do a Prisma, or sorry, a Drizzle migration. So let's just go ahead and restart that, refresh the page, and hopefully we should see the bid interval pop up. Now I forget, did we do starting price in cents as well? I thought we might have. I'm going to load up Drizzle Studio real quick. npm run db studio. And then we're going to go and look at our database real quick. Yeah, so these are in cents, I believe. And so in the UI, we're displaying $100 and really should be $1. So I think a helper function somewhere. We could probably go back to, we have like a utils directory here. And I'll say currency.ts. And I'm going to say export function convert cents to dollar. Go ahead and take in a cents number and just do that. Maybe math.floor just in case. And I'll keep this less verbose. I'll say convert to dollar, and then it takes in a cents argument. So like that's, the argument itself is self-explanatory of like what it takes in. And now what we could do is wrap this stuff throughout our code base. Wherever we're displaying money, we should probably display convert to dollar instead. Okay, so now it's $1. And then you could also, if you wanted to change this, I'm going to say format to dollar, and then I'll say to fixed to, and then I'm going to go ahead and just interpolate this to be a string. So now instead of convert to dollar, say format to dollar, that, and now we have the decimal, which is pretty nice. Yeah, so I think there's other places we were displaying that 100. So let me go back to all auctions and let's try to fix wherever that was. So remember on the auctions page, we were doing this like divisible stuff in the item card, I think. Right? So now we want to say format to dollar. Wait, format to dollar? Wasn't that what it was called? Why is that not showing up? Okay, now it's showing up. Format to dollar. Okay, so now that's going to be formatted. I think also under my auctions. Oh, that's using the same card, so we should be good. And technically, we can come back and show like the bit interval. I don't think showing the bit interval here would be as important. I don't think. But let's go back to the auction page. Let's click on this shoe. And again, what are we trying to do? We want to be able to allow users to place bids. So if I were to click place a bid, really all that should do is just add an entry or some type of record somewhere so we can keep track of what users have placed what bids. Okay, so let's try to implement that. I don't think it should be too hard to do. But right before I do that, I do want to commit because we've made quite a lot of changes and this is getting out of hand. So let's go ahead and just commit everything. And I will say formatting currency and working on the item page. Cool. Yeah, so how do you place a bid? Let's go find that place a bid button. Let's go over here. And when someone clicks on this button, what we want to do is we want to probably get their current user and just like insert a record somewhere. So if you remember, we already have a bids table, but we haven't really built much into it. I think what we want to do now is link this to an items table and also keep track of the current bid. So I'm going to say amount, and we're going to keep track of an integer here. And then we're also going to say an item ID, but this thing needs to reference the other items. So I'm going to copy user ID and I'm going to change it to item ID like this. That's going to reference items of ID. And then I'm actually going to put this below. I want items to be defined first, and then I'm going to use it over here. Cool. And then also the user who placed the bid. Like we should probably keep track of the user ID. So again, let's copy the user ID here, paste that in. And that should be good, I think. I'm going to think of anything else we might need. Yeah, that should be good enough. All right, let's just go ahead and go back to here. I'll say npm run db push. That should create the new table. And before I run it, I just want to double check I didn't screw anything up. Because it's easier to double check and do it right the first time than they have to like figure out a fix for your migrations. But items, users, I mean, it seems good to me. Just run it. Yes, and it did fail. Why did this fail? It says key columns, item ID, and ID are incompatible. And that is because I put text here. This needs to be, I think it needs to be serial. And let's run this again. And unfortunately, I think I've already screwed this up. So sometimes when you run a migration, if you screw some columns up, it'll create the table, but then it doesn't create the constraints. And so the only fix I can figure out is you have to like blow away your database, or you go back to your Postgres Explorer. And I'm going to go ahead and just write a new query. And then I'm going to go ahead and say select the connection. We'll do bid buddy. And then we're going to go ahead and say delete, or is it drop table bids. I don't know if it's drop or delete. It's BB bids. Try it again. There we go. So let's try this. I dropped the table, and now I should be able to rerun this, hopefully. Everything worked fine. So keep that in mind. We are just doing DB pushes, which is like a faster way to iterate locally. And then once you get a solidified migration plan, you do like a migration generate. Okay, so why do we do that? We did that so we can keep track of the bids. So go ahead and make a server action. I'm going to make a file called actions.ts. I'll say use server. I'll say export async function create bid action. And this needs to take in a item ID, which would be a number. And then also probably, it's an action, so we should know what the user is. So in order to get the user, I think we've done this before, we have to get the session. So I can say session is equal to await auth, like this. This is how you can get the session, I believe. And then if there is no session defined, we should just throw an error. So I'll just go ahead and say throw new error. And then if there is no user, again, we'll just throw an error as well. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to create a bid. So I'm going to say await database. Again, I don't know why this is not importing, but we'll just do it manually, I guess. And then we'll say insert. And then we're going to say bids, which is a table. Say values. And then we're going to go ahead and place in a bid of some amount and an item ID, also probably user ID. This needs to be session.user.id. All right, so a couple of things here. It thinks that ID could potentially be undefined. So I'm going to go ahead and just say like if ID is not defined. We might be able to put these all in one line and like make this a little cleaner. I don't know why we have to check all these, honestly. This might be a next auth thing. So although this will place a bid, this isn't going to have the correct bid information, right? We have to increment the bid by a certain interval, which means that we need to get the item using Drizzle. So I'm going to do a query.items.find first. And I need to grab where the item matches the item ID. If there is no item, we should probably throw an error. Go ahead and auto import EQ. So that'll give us back the item, but the amount that we place on the item needs to be the current item value. So like, what is the current item value? We don't know what the current item value is. So let's take a step back. We're going to go back to our schema. We're going to go to the item and we're going to say current bid. Okay. We're going to save that, or we're going to apply that so that we can go over here and we can say item.current bid plus the bid interval. So every time someone clicks on that button, we want to take the highest bid that was on the item, add an interval to it, and that is now the latest bid information. Okay, so if we inserted this bid information, we should probably go back and update the item. So I'm going to say await db update items, and we want to set current bid equal to that. Let's double check this is working. So set the current bid equal to this, where the item matches the item ID. So we have duplicate code here. I'm gonna go ahead and say like latest bid value is equal to this, and then that's what we're gonna use here. Now there's things we could do, like we could wrap this in a promise all to make it fast and more performant. Honestly, I think it's fine for right now. Let's just keep it. There's also probably some race conditions that we probably need to add in a transaction in case two people try to bid at the same time, but we're not going to overcomplicate this. Again, this is just a tutorial to teach you some of the basics of Next.js and stuff. That's more advanced. But let's see if we can get this bid thing working. So let's go over here. I'm going to make a action. Actually, what are we doing? Oh yeah, we made an action here, which we need to call when we click the button. So let's just go ahead and make a form here. And then I'm going to go ahead and just add an action here where we're going to call create bid action. And then something that I haven't shown you yet is you can actually bind. So if you want to pass in that item ID, you can do item.id here. And that's actually going to just basically bind a new function that has this defined so that when someone clicks the button, it's going to submit properly. Still a couple things we want to do. Remember we have this hard-coded to an empty array. Now instead, what we want to do is we want to get all the bids that are associated with this item. So we can go down here and we can actually do like const bids is equal to await, database query bids find many. Honestly, I don't remember how to do an order by, so let's do order by and see what comes up for us. Order by, and then they do the table name, and then they do, oh sorry, this is just the columns. You can also wrap it in descending. Okay, so let's go here. And what they're saying we need to do is we'll say descending, and we'll say bids dot ID. Now what makes this confusing is I'm going to go ahead and rename this to all bids because we have some like function overloading going on. Because we want this to come from the schema. And I think this should be good. Over here, call this all bids. And some of these things, what's missing here? User ID. Yeah, so before we thought there was going to be like a username on it. And now we're just storing a user ID. We also don't have a timestamp, so we have to go back and add a timestamp. So no biggie, go to the schema. I'll just go ahead and say like timestamp. And we'll do this. And then for username, technically we could do like a SQL join and get the user image and name. So let's just go ahead and first run this. There we go. So now they should all have a timestamp on them. So we can go back over here. We can say timestamp. And then for the username, how do we get that? Well, let's go back to where we're getting the bids. And something that we haven't done yet is we can actually do joins. So I can say with, and then I can say, I don't think I can do anything yet because I actually have to create a relationship. Let's go back to the schema. Down here, there's a way to define relationships in Drizzle, which we haven't done. We need to relate items and bids together. And we also need to relate bids with users. So I think if I go to declaring relationships, they'll tell you how to do it. Go here. We're going to bring in a user relationship. Make sure we auto import that from Drizzle. And we want to define a relationship on bids. And we want to say user is equal to a relationship to the users table. Fields would be bids.userID. And that's going to reference users of ID. Does that make sense? So basically we have to define this thing. And the moment you define the relationships on the bids schema here, you can actually go back into your action, where we're actually, sorry, the page where we're calling with, and now you'll see user pops up here. So I'm going to say user true. So as we fetch all these bids, we also want to fetch all the user information with them. But just be careful because that's going to fetch back the emails too. We really just want the image and the name. Okay, so now all bids should have, if I look at it, it should have like bid.user.name, and we should be able to use it. A lot of stuff going on here. Let's see if this actually works. Let's go ahead and check this out. I probably need to restart my Next.js server. Let's just do that. And before I click place a bid, there's something I forgot. We need to revalidate the path after we've done this. So I'm going to say revalidate path. And then we want to revalidate the current item/item ID that we're on so that the page will refresh and download the latest bids. There's some stuff that's missing here. What's missing? Timestamp needs to be a new date. I'll just do that. And let's just try this out. So if I click it, let's try to figure out what's going on because it's definitely not working. So I'm going to go back to here and let's go to bids. There's a network error. I don't have Drizzle Studio running. So let's go back over here. Say run Drizzle Studio. Refresh this page. This is all defined. Like we have bid information. We have the item ID of 13, the user who put the bid. We have the timestamps. So that's working, but for some reason, it's still displaying no bids. Probably have something hard-coded to like nothing. So for a little bit of debugging session, let's console log all bids here. Console log all bids. And then we're going to go to our next app and notice that it's still giving back an empty array for all of our bids. So we got to figure out why that's happening. Why is that happening? First of all, let's try to console log what is the item ID that we're trying to query for. It looks like it's a string of 13, which seems like it's the correct item ID. Okay, and we are getting back an item, otherwise this would not be 1. So why is this not finding anything? Order by bids of ID, where? Oh, I think I need to do this. Bids of item ID. I had the where clause incorrect. Make sure that we're actually looking at the correct column. Otherwise, obviously, you won't get back the information. Now we're getting back info. See this stuff coming back? We have all the information coming back. And now we see that it's showing up properly in our UI. Pretty cool. And it's also in the right order, I believe. I'll have to figure that out. So we're missing place a bid here. Or we could probably place it here, because if you think about it, if there's going to be a lot of bids, we probably want the user to be able to find the button quick. If you put it at the bottom of this list, they might have to scroll down just to be able to place a bid. Not the best. So let's find where we're doing that placeholder, which was like here. And then we're going to copy this. And we're going to put it at the very top next to current bids. So what I could do is wrap this in a flex, say justify between. Go ahead and put that there. Now we got a place bid button. Now if you click it, notice that it does place a bid and it did interval. It did increment the interval by $1. Now again, we have to format these money because that is not the right format here. So let's go ahead and say format $, wrap the amount. There we go. So every time someone clicks it, it's going to place a bid, and that's going to be at the top of the list. Also, we should probably have the current price be displayed here. So let's find where we have like starting price displayed. And we're going to make another one called like current bid. Go ahead and say dot current bid. And that should be $5. Every time we click this, that should increment. We got 6, 7, 8, 9. And now you can scroll down and see all the bids that are happening on this, which is pretty cool. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves, there are some things that I want to do in terms of code cleanup. I like having a separate data access layer. I don't like having our components know about the ORM that we're using. So I would make a new folder here called data access. And inside of this, I would just put something called bids. Bids.ts. And I'm going to go ahead and just take some of this code out. And I'm going to say export async function, get bids or item. This will take an item ID. And I want to paste in all that code there. Like this. And just return all bids. Make sure I can like auto import some of this stuff. So like I need to import that. I need to import descending bids from the schema file. This should already be a number, so I don't need to parse the number again. And now we can actually just call the data access layer from our component so that we kind of abstract the way, like, what are we using to fetch the data? Should your React components know that you're using Drizzle? My opinion is no, they shouldn't know. So let's just go ahead and do that. We already have the item ID, so we can just fetch it. And technically, you could do a join too. Like if you wanted to go over here and make this be a width, you could do a join and get the bids, and then for the bids, you could do another join. That actually might be more performant. But we're going to keep this simple. I'm just going to slowly make some better changes. So I'll say items will be another one. We'll go ahead and just copy our bid access layer. We're going to cut this out. Go ahead and paste this in. Turn the item. And I'm going to say get item by the item ID. Go ahead and auto import that. There we go. So again, let's go back to our page, and I'm going to say const item is equal to await that parse int item ID. Go through here, delete any unused imports, and now we don't have any traces of Drizzle anywhere in this component, which I think is a much cleaner approach. It just allows you to maintain your application a little bit better, because it's, as your project gets larger and larger, it gets a lot more complex to maintain, and having these separations of concerns and these different 3-tiered layers, very useful in my opinion. Let's make sure this works. I'm going to refresh the page, and now we get all the bids. I can still place bids. Awesome. So good work. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. I'm going to say ability to place bids. So there's still a lot we could add into this. For example, like at some point the bid has to close. So we'd have to have like an end date for the bid, which we can add in. Another thing I want to add in is the ability to get notified. If I start bidding on an auction, I want a notification the moment someone outbids me. And this is where we're going to bring in Knock, which is a really powerful notification system that hooks directly into your application to allow you to send notifications to other users and have those kind of show up for you automatically. So let me sign in, and then this is the Knock dashboard. So this is where you can start configuring different things, messages, you can create users, etc. But what we want to do is we want to set up our application to work with Knock. So the first thing we need to do is get some API keys. And you'll see here we have a secret key and a public key. And also, Knock has a built-in notification component library for Next.js. So if you go to the documentation, you'll see that they have a Knock Labs/React component library that you can start using to display a really nice notification panel with a notification widget. Let's go ahead and try to install this. So I'm going to go ahead and just install this over here. Get 4 tabs going. Install that. And now you can kind of just use it like this. So the first thing we have to do is we're going to have to wrap all of our stuff with a Knock provider and a Knock feed provider. So let's just go ahead and grab this. Now technically I can grab all this. That should be good. Let's just do we have any providers? I don't think we even have providers, do we? Let me go to layout real quick. Okay, so we don't even have any providers, so I'm actually going to grab all this code. And then I'm going to make a new file here called providers.tsx. I'm going to paste this in, and I'm going to say providers here, and we're going to bring in this use ref and use state. Technically for the layout, I'm actually going to move this up a level to the layout here. And then we need to define a couple things. So first of all, API key. This has to be a public key, I believe. So let's actually put it over in the client. So I'll say next public Knock API key. Like this. What else do we need? We need a feed ID. So I'm going to say next public feed ID. Go to that. And then we're going to go ahead and bring those 2 in. Okay, so now that we have those, we're going to have to refactor this a little bit. User.env library that we have. And for user ID, we have to get that from the session. So again, this is a client component, or we should make it one. And then we're going to have to go over here and I'll say export function providers. Go ahead and just refactor this a little bit. We want to take this in with children. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and render out children here. Maybe we can do it there. And then here we'll prefix this with next public. What else are we missing? So user ID. Again, we have Next.auth set up, so we can get the session by saying use session. And then we can pass in the user ID by saying session data.user.id. Okay. Now, technically, if this isn't defined, we could probably just render out the children. So like, this is what you want if you are logged in and like wrap everything with the knock provider and stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to say if there is no session or there is no session.data.user, like that. Let me do this. I'm just going to go ahead and return the children like this. Data is also probably undefined. Let's do that. Do that. You know, let's just check the ID too. Everything. We'll check everything. And this will allow us to hopefully only do this whole knock provider stuff once the user ID is set. Otherwise, we'll just show the children like normal. So now that we have the provider here, let's go to our layout, which is over here. And then I'm going to wrap all this stuff here. So I'll say it'll be providers. Go ahead and put that in there. Import that. There we have it. So last step is in the .env file, we have to bring in the two things we just added. So we added in the knock public API key, and then we also added in the knock feed ID. I might actually prefix this like this. Bear with me. I'm just going to fix this up real quick. I want this to say knock in it so I know. All right, so now let's go back to our dashboard, which was this one. We have the public key. Let's just go ahead and grab it, and I'll put it right here. And for the feed ID, we'd have to make a new one. So let's go ahead and go to integrations. And you'll notice over here, if you click on create channel, you can create multiple things. So like you can make a channel for sending out emails. You can make a channel for sending out push notifications, for doing chat directly to Slack or Discord. Pretty cool. What we want for right now is the ability to send off notifications inside of our application for other users to get a little notification bell icon, right? So I'm going to click on in-app knock. I'm going to click next. I'm going to say bid buddy is the name of it. Go ahead and create that. And now we have a channel ID here, which we need to grab. So let's go ahead and copy that channel ID. And then I'm going to go and put it right here for feed ID. Okay. So hopefully now, if everything is configured correctly, we can go up to our application. And it says use session must be wrapped in a session provider. So I do think there's something that we forgot to configure with Next.auth. I think the error told us what to do. So if we just look at the error, we need it in a session provider. So again, if we just go over here and like, I think we could probably just wrap this whole thing in a session provider. Okay, so here's the tricky part. We need use session. So actually I'm gonna go to the layout and I'm actually just gonna wrap all this in a session provider so that when we do the knock provider, it has access to that. So there could be some refactoring and renaming here, but we're just going to go with it. So now the application is loading just fine. What I want to do though is I want to put a bell icon right here in the header. So let's point out real quick, we have a notification icon button that's inside of this providers, but we should probably put these in the header itself. So I'm going to cut these out. Let's go to our header. I'm going to put these right here. And then also I think the state variables that we have, I'm going to cut those out. I'm going to put them here as well. And then I'm going to put use client at the top of this header like this. And I think this needs to be a use session now instead of an await. Import that. Don't do auth because auth is only for server rendered code. And now we come over here, we can import this. And this needs to be data.user.name. Okay. Doing some cleanup, clean that up a little bit. You know, at this point, let's just clean everything up. I'm gonna call this a knock provider. And then we're gonna go over here and call this a knock app knock provider. Like this. Go back to the layout. Call this app knock provider. And go ahead and clean that up. Okay. So if we go back to our app, let's try to figure out, it is not allowed to define inline use server. So I think there's something wrong with our header. So unfortunately, I think our sign in and sign out buttons were written in a way to like not work with client components. So one thing we could do is we could just put a button here, and this will be our sign out button. But instead we'll say on click, and I think we can just call a button that says sign out from Next Auth React. And I think you can pass this a callback URL to be that. And we could do the same thing with sign in, hopefully. Let's say sign in, and this will call sign in. And then these two buttons can go away. And hopefully that fixes our issue. Almost. I think we gotta get rid of the async here. Okay, use session must be wrapped in a session provider. So again, the header, there's something that we're doing wrong in the layout. And that is because I didn't wrap it in the session provider like I was supposed to. There is a little bug with this logic here. Basically, when Next.js runs like on the server, use session will never be defined with a value. And so like, we want to make sure that we always have the knock provider passed in, and instead we should probably just like fall back on, I don't know, nothing for the user ID. And this should hopefully work now. All right, so as you can see in the application, everything's working, and we have this bell icon. And when you click it, you get this nice drop down that has all the notifications that you'd see for a user. You can actually filter by unread and read notifications and mark everything as read. So the next steps are, let's try to log in as someone else, and let's also place a bid. And when you place a bid on an item, we want to notify everyone who's also attached to this auction that someone has outbidded you. So let's go back to the page for the bidding. Okay, and let's go to the actions over here. And what we want to do is we want to send off a notification, like I said, send notifications to everyone else on this item who has placed a bid. We want to let people know that like, hey, someone outbidded you, so they have an opportunity to come in and actually like, you know, place another bid. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to bring in the knock JavaScript API. And secondly, we need to bring in an API key. So let's go back to API keys here. I'm going to grab this secret key because we're going to need that as well. So let's go back to our env file, and we're going to say knock secret key. And then we're going to go ahead and just import that from process env. And then in our .env file, we'll say knock secret key, paste that in. So now we're going to bring in a library called knock.js node. So let's go ahead and install knocklab/node. Now that that's installed, we can go ahead and import it like so. Let's go ahead and paste this in. And then we're going to say env dot, make sure we import this, knock secret key. And now we have a JavaScript library that we can use to send off notifications. So we're going to grab this knock object, and we want to basically get all the bids that currently exist on the item. So I'm going to go ahead and say const bids is equal to await database query bids find many. We want to get where the bid is equal to the item ID that we're currently looking at. Okay, so now that we have all the bids, what we're going to do is we're going to loop over all of them, and I'm going to push them to a user IDs list. So let's start this off with the empty array, and I'll say for const bid of current bids. And then I want to say if the current user ID does not exist in that user ID's list. Also, yeah, so I'm going to say if the current user ID is not equal to the one that's in the bid, then we're going to push it. But I also want to check to make sure that user ID does not already have the user that we're trying to push in. Okay, so this should give us a unique list of IDs. And then what we could do is we could say await knock dot notification or notify, I mean. And we're going to say user placed bid. And then we want to paste in some things. So for example, we want actor, and this will be the current user ID who's sending off the notification. And then we want the recipients, which would be all the user IDs. And then for data, we could just put a message here saying that, yeah, we'll do item ID and then bid amount. Okay, so now when someone places a bid, that should send a notification from that user to all the other different users who are on that item, and that should show notifications in their dashboard. Now, the actor may need to change a little bit. We may need to say like this is going to be a system generated notification, but it might make it more personal if it did come from like another user. Now I'm going to make one more tweak, because with knock, in order to send off notifications to the user, you have to first identify them. So this is how you can do it one-off. So like if a user first registers into your system, you could potentially send this off. But over time, a user may update their user information. And so you can do it with inlining, which is what we're going to try right here. So instead of just passing an array of user IDs, we're going to actually pass it a structure that looks like this. And so we're going to go ahead and say user IDs.map. And then we want to return a data structure that has ID, which will be user ID. And then we need to get the name and the email of that user, which at this point we don't have right now in the bids, because we'd have to say with, and then we'll say user true. And now with every bid, we'll have the information. So we have to kind of keep track of that as we're pushing that into the array. So instead of just pushing the user ID here, let's push in the ID, and then we'll pass in the name, bid.user.name, and then also the email. Like this. Go ahead and save that. I'm also going to change this to be called recipients, so that it's more straightforward what we're doing here. And then I'm going to try to find the recipient whose user ID matches the bid.user ID. And we want to make sure that this doesn't come back with anything. And then also let's add a type to this. Let's save that ID, name, email. Recipient is an array of that. ID, name, and email. So if this isn't defined, I'll just say like anonymous. That. And for ID, this just needs to be casted to a string, I think. Let me do that. I'll make that a string. And this will be called recipients. All right, hopefully this works. I think it should be fine. So we're basically making an array of recipients. We loop through them, make sure that we only push unique recipients to that list, and also recipients that aren't the current recipient. And then we send it off. So I'm going to sign out, and I'm going to sign back into someone else. All right, so after signing out, I do notice that the sign out button is still saying sign out. Oh, you know what? It's because session's always going to be defined. I'm dumb. So I think what we could do instead, if like I could just say if there is no user ID, like I think this is the issue. If there's a user ID, show the sign out. If there's not, show sign in. There we go. Now showing sign in. And now that I think about it, there's some additional issues with the headers. Like we shouldn't be showing these links if the user is signed out. So I'm going to go back to the headers here. And the ones that we care about showing would be like, if there's a user ID, then we can show these. And I think I need to wrap this in a fragment. There we go. And then for placing the bid, I guess technically you could still go there if you're not signed in, but there's some things we need to hide, like this place a bid button should not show unless you're actually logged in. So place a bid, let's find that and let's wrap that in a conditional as well. And yeah, this whole thing here needs to be if there's a user ID. Okay, let's do that. I think I'm also showing that button somewhere else here. Yeah, like here. And then we're going to go up here and say const user ID to await auth. Technically, this will be session. Session is declared, but its value is never read. Yeah, so instead, we don't need to check user ID. Just make sure they're logged in. Do they have a session? If they do, we'll say place a bid and show that button. Okay, so now the button's hidden, and also if you were to go to like another item that has no bids, there's no button there. Great. If you sign in now, which is what we were originally trying to do, let's sign in with a different user. Let's go back to all of our auctions. Let's go back to shoes. And we should be seeing the bell icon, so I screwed that up somehow. Let's go back and figure out how to get that bell icon showing back up. So over here, we're saying if there is a user ID, then display the icons and the popovers. But for some reason, those are not displaying. I'm guessing I have user ID incorrectly defined. So I'm going to go ahead and say console log user ID. And then we'll go and look at the console. For some reason, that is undefined all the way through there for some reason. So if we were to instead just console log what session is, what does session look like? Session has session.data.user, and there's no ID on here. So I think the issue that we're seeing here is that in Next.auth, some things are not going to be attached to your session by default. So you actually need to add a callback so that you can define the user ID. So let's go back to configuration. Do they have callbacks here? Let's go down to with database, and they give you a callback example. So let's copy all this code, and I'm going to paste that in. And the reason I do this is they're trying to protect the client from leaking any information that it shouldn't see. So you have to manually define the ID here so that you can use it in the front end. And once you've done that, I think what you need to do in the front end, because right now, like if you look at session user, it's potentially undefined. And so I think we can extend the types here. So I think they might have a way to extend types. Let's do Typescript. Let's see. All right, so here's an example how you can declare an extension of the types. I'll go to Next.js though, and we're going to do this. Put that right there. Make sure you import default session. And this needs to be ID, which will be a string. I'm trying to see if there's anything special we have to do to use it. I don't think so. Okay, so hopefully now we can do session.data.user. And now ID will always be defined, which is what we want. So I apologize for that. That's just something I forgot about. But now we should be able to use that ID as like a knowing when to hide and show stuff. Let's go back to our app. Here we go. The ID is showing up now. Great. So another thing that we have to do is we have to create an actual workflow. So user place bid. This is a custom workflow that we haven't created yet. So let's go back to knock. And we're going to go to our dashboard and we need to go to workflows. We're going to create another one here. I'm going to call this user place bid. And then I'll say the user placed bid. And then we're going to go ahead and just click create. And so once we're here, what we can do is basically from our Node app, we can trigger this workflow and we can define knock to do different things. So for example, if I click on this trigger, we want to go and say add first step. And what we want to do is we want to go down to the in-app channels, which is something we defined earlier. I'm going to say I want to send off an event to other people in my app. Let's just go ahead and select the BidBuddy channel here. Okay. And now the way Knock works is like you can make changes in this UI, but you actually need to commit them for them to take place. So I'm going to go ahead and say commit to development, and you'll see some differences in the diffs. And they use this internal JSON to kind of keep track of your workflow. Well, let's just go ahead and commit it. And now this workflow has been committed. I should be able to go back. And if I go to my UI, I should be able to send out these notifications to other users. Let's go back over here. I'm going to do a refresh over here. And we want to basically wrap this. I want to say if recipients.length is greater than 0, then we should probably do this. Otherwise, we don't want to send off notifications to nobody. Okay. So let's test this out. I'm logged in as, I'm not really sure who I'm logged in as. I have so many accounts that have my name. So I think what we should do is probably either change this to email for this demo or display an icon. So actually, I'm going to go to the header real quick. And where we display name, I'm also going to display an image of the user's icon. So I'm going to say image, and then I'll say source is equal to session.data.user.image. Okay, and this could be a width of 50, height of 50. I'll say alt is user avatar. Inside here, I can delete that. I can make this self-closing, and I'll save this. And then if it's not defined, I will just go ahead and not display it. So let's just go ahead and wrap this whole thing and only display it if it is defined. Okay. So now we're getting an issue with Next.js where you actually have to give it permission to download images from a third-party URL. So I'm going to go over to our next config. We already have remote patterns here, but we need to add one for this Google image location. So I'll say protocol, HTTPS, port, and then what else do we want? Yeah, we'll keep path name not defined. So refresh the page. Hopefully we should see an icon pop up in the top right. Okay, that took a while, but now it's showing up. And then we could probably make this a little bit smaller. Then we could say class name rounded full. That should make it round. Technically, I could probably bring in a Shadcn avatar component, but that's probably good enough. So now I can sign out and sign back in as different people. So for example, let's sign back in as this other email account. Here we go. And I'm going to start fresh. I'm going to just create a brand new auction because I think this is just getting a little bit too complicated. And I'll say like t-shirt, start at $2.99. And then we're going to find a picture of a t-shirt. Okay, go ahead and upload that. Okay, so now we have a t-shirt. Let's go ahead and start bidding on this. Now, one thing I will say is you shouldn't be able to place a bid on your own item. I feel like that's kind of like insider trading. So again, for this bid page, if you are the owner of this, we should probably hide place a bid. So let's go ahead and go back to that bid page, and somewhere here, instead of just having session as our conditional, I'm going to make a constant here that says can place bid, and I'm going to say if session is defined and the current user ID of the auction item is not equal to the current session's user ID. Because like I said, you don't want people to be able to outbid other people on their own items. That's kind of weird. Let's go ahead and say can place bid in place of that one, and then also in place of this one. So I'm going to hide that button for people who actually created this. Let's sign out. And I'm going to sign back in as someone else who should be able to place a bid on that t-shirt. Go to here, go to place bid on the t-shirt. I'm going to place a bid, and that placed the original bid. but that didn't send off any notifications because we have logic to not send it off to our own user. So let's sign out again. Let's sign in as different email. Let's go here, place a bid. Go ahead and click it. I think I might be doing this wrong. I think this might be workflows.trigger. And then that's how you can trigger the actual workflow that we created. Same information, we can pass in recipients and data. Okay, so now it's getting an error saying that the actor in the workflow is missing. Okay, so it says you can also inline identify actors the same way. So like technically this, if I just paste an ID here, and then I said name, I mean, that would just come from the session, right? Session user.name, and email would be session.user.email. Okay, so that should hopefully be able to work. And then I'm going to say anonymous if they're not defined. And then you do have to say collection users, I think. So let's try this again. I'm going to go back to our app. Go ahead and just start fresh. Click place a bid. And there we go. That created a bid. And I want to show you, if I go back to knock, I want to go back to my messages. And we should see that we sent a message on the bid buddy channel. And this is the message that we sent out. So if you look down here, it says that we sent out a bid amount for $4. The item ID is 14. And that sent from this user. And who did it send to? It sent it to the web dev Cody user. Okay. So now if I were to log out and log back in as the web dev Cody user, hopefully we should see a notification pop up for that user over here. So let's go ahead, click this, go over here. And now we see one notification bell icon pop up. If I click it, it says Cody Seibert completed an activity. And you can click it to read the message. You can also go here and just delete the notification, archive it. And again, all these components are built out of the box using Next.js, which is pretty nice because I didn't really have to do much work to have a built-in notification system. Now, one thing you might have noticed in the notification dropdown was there's no message. So if you want to customize what's displayed in that cell, you can go ahead and add this to your notification feed. So let's go back to the header and let's find the feed. And then info render item, we're going to go ahead and just make our own custom JSX component here. So we can just go ahead and say like hello world, just to test it out and see what it looks like. Go back to our app. And again, I'm just going to place a bid on the same t-shirt. I'm going to place a bid as this user, and I'm going to log it back out and log in as a different user here. Back to the t-shirt, and a notification icon popped up here. If I click this, notice that it says hello world. So you can actually customize what shows up here as you'd want. And if we were to actually like console log this item, I think we should have some information on this. So like data, you could probably get the item ID. Render that out and see what we get. So now we got 14, which is pretty nice because now whatever we put in the message inside of a knock notification, we can display that over here if we want to. So that's pretty nice because now what we can do is we could simply put a link here. I can go ahead and put a link. And then I'm going to go ahead and, whoops, go ahead and do this. We're going to use that item ID and we're going to put an href to /items/item ID like this. And I'll just go ahead and say, someone outbidded you. Let's go back and click this. Now we have a link, we can click it and it'll take you directly to that item. So actually, if I were to go over here to my all auctions and click it, it takes you back to this page. Now, I think we would have to close it. If you manually were to click this, like we would have to basically say unclick, and then we need to manually close this like this. So let's try it again. I'm going to click on this. Someone outbidded you. Takes you to the page. And you could also show the information about whose avatar outbidded you and stuff. You can style this. Let's just go here and just try to make this a little bit custom. So BG gray 100, rounded, XL, and then I'll say padding of 8. Okay. And And we could technically also add some like margin, I think, to this. Or if you wanted to actually wrap this in a div like this and put the padding on this itself, padding of 8. There we go. Someone outbidded you. You can click on this. It'll take you to the link. We could also probably get the user's name here. It'd probably be nice if we put the name of the thing in the notification as well. So like back to where we did the actions for creating the bid. Again, you can put whatever you want here. So let's just go ahead and put like the item name. We could say item.name. Just so there's a little bit more information. And then I'm going to go ahead and just put that on the notification itself. We'll say span, we'll say class name, text of bold, and then I'll say item.item.data.item name. Now, right now it won't be defined because we haven't sent a new notification yet, but if I were to go ahead and just click on this and sign back out as somebody else, come back in. Someone outbidded you on t-shirt. Now, why is this not bolded? Text bold. Oh, I think it's font bold. And then we could also do like item.item.data. What do we call it? Bid amount. So here I'll just go ahead and say like that. Buy, put a money sign, and I think this will show it in, yeah, this is going to show it in cents. So I have to say format $2. There we go. So that's how you can completely customize it, but they do provide you in this library a notification cell. So instead of, if you don't want to like completely override how Nock gives you that component, you can actually just use the notification cell, I believe. And let's kind of see what this looks like. I think you need to pass it the item here. Actually, what does it say we need to do? We need to give it props and items. So let's just go ahead and do this. Say props. And then I think this doesn't need to be like doubled. That. Let's see how this looks like. Let's go over here. There you have it. Now it says, hey Cody Cyber completing an activity. You can still archive it, but now you have your custom thing that you want to display here. So if you didn't want to do all this extra padding stuff, which we probably shouldn't do anymore, now that I figured out the notification cell, you could just put your custom message here. Probably get rid of the background gray, like that. And you can click on it to read it, but then you can actually click on the item to go to it. Just like that. And you can technically, you could give this whole thing a class name and say, you know, text blue of 400, hover text blue of 500. All right, a lot of changes. Let's just go ahead and commit what we have. So I'm going to go ahead and say like custom notification feed, and I'll commit that. The one thing that's important when it comes to auctions is we need the ability for the user to create an end date. And we're going to keep this simple and just keep it to a date, but to add in date time, it's a little bit more complicated, especially since Shadcn doesn't seem like it has a built-in component for date time or timestamps. So we'll just keep it at a date picker for right now. So if you read through this, this is the date picker is built off of the popover and the calendar. So after you go and install both of those, we can simply just copy the date picker component, and we're going to go back down here, and I think I already installed them, but over here I'll just say like date picker ESX. I'll paste in all that example code, and then we should be able to use this date picker component somewhere in our application. So like, let's just go ahead and copy this. We'll go to create, and we're going to try to use the date picker somewhere here. So I'm going to go down here, paste it in, auto import that. And let's just at least look at what it looks like. I'm going to go to create auction. Here's the date picker. We can pick whatever date we want the auction to end. And then we get back May 16th, 2024. Pretty cool. But we're going to have to get that information and send it back to a higher level variable to keep track of it. Because right now it's in the state here. So I think what we need to do is cut this out and put this at a higher level so that we can pass it in. So I'll say like date and then set date. And this can take in some props of date, set date, that. Technically, this would be like a dispatch date, something like that. There we go. React state action. I'm going to make sure date is always defined. Okay, so now what we could do is go back here. We need to make sure that date is actually defined. I'll just go ahead and say like new date when this component first is created. And then let's just make sure it says today's date, May 13th. Cool. And then when you change it and submit this form, we want to send that to the backend so we can track it, right? Right now, I don't think we're sending that in. So let's just go ahead and say like end date. And then we'll just go ahead and pass in that date object. And then we need to make sure that end date is accepted here. So I'll say end date and then end date, the date object. And then we're going to have to persist that. So let's again say end date, which means we need to go to our schema, go to our items, and we'll say end date is equal to timestamp. That looks like this. Now, again, when we run this migration, I think it's going to truncate all of our tables because basically adding a new column is required. So I'm going to truncate it. We'll start fresh. And then we'll go back over here and see what is this complaining about. It doesn't like the idea that we have dispatch set state action. I think this just needs to say or undefined, maybe. Maybe I'll just do this. Hold on. I'm going to go back and make some of this stuff optional. Yeah, for right now, I'm going to say if there is no end date set. So if date, I'm just going to return. Keep it simple. Get this working. Yeah, so now if we go into Drizzle, actually, I probably should restart this just in case. Let's go ahead and refresh this page just in case. We're going to go ahead and type in an item. So shoes, say $3. Find some shoes. I'll pick a date of the 17th. I'll click post item. That should submit the item. And then we could probably display the end date somewhere here on this. So like, let's go to the card. And now we should have access to use date FNS to format when this thing is going to end. So let's go ahead and just copy this. Say ends on. And then we want to say item dot end date. Let's just try passing format here and see what this outputs. So I'm going to say format, and then we can import that from date FSN. Sorry, date FNS. And what is this complaining about? It says it needs more arguments. So today is a EEEE. So let's just try EEEE and see what that prints out. Over here, ends on Friday. So maybe that works for your project needs. Maybe it works for ours. I don't know. Ends on Friday. We should probably actually put like a real date. It's like we could probably do like month, day, year. Use YY instead of capital YY. Okay. There we go. Ends on 5/17. That. I'm going to do lowercase m's too. I think I can just do one M and that'll just show a 5 instead of, there you go. Cool. So now you can see when bids are going to end. And technically we could have it say that if it's past a certain date, then it's over. Like we could probably like disable this button, or we could just say like ended here. So let's go ahead and try doing that. I'll just say function is bid over, and that's going to take in a item, this, and we can just go ahead and see if today's date is currently greater than the end date, then the bid is over. So we can just go ahead and say, if the bid is over, then we're going to go and display this. Otherwise, we'll display the normal paragraph tag like we had before. I'll say bidding is over. So how do we verify this? Let's go to Drizzle Studio. Let's go to items, and this should have an end date on it now. And I can actually just change this to 12. And let's refresh. And now it says bidding is over. Instead of saying place bid, what we could do is just say view. So I'll just kind of copy the same logic here, or what we could do, yeah, I'll just copy it. And then I'm going to say, yeah, so instead of saying place bid here, I'm just going to say is bid over. Pass it the item, same thing, do a ternary, and then I'll just say like bid, view bid. Otherwise, place bid. And we can also change the variant. So again, let's go here. We'll say variant and is bid over. Pass in the item. If it's over, we'll do primary. I think it's default. Let's do outline, and then we'll say default if it's not over. Okay. That's what it looks like if the bid's over. You can still click it, and then you can get into the bid page. But if it's still running, change this back to 17, and refresh the page, you'll see that it says place bid. And now, secondly, we can come back to this page and probably display or hide those buttons if the bid is over. Let's try the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and sign into someone else because this person is the one who uploaded the shoes. Go back and sign into this one. Go to place bid. And then instead of saying place bid, we should probably just not show those buttons at all. Which means that we should probably move this to a utility. Go to utils, and I'll say like bids, export function is bid over, import the item schema, and we're going to import that one instead of defining it in the file. And then let's copy this, and let's go back to the place bid item that we saw other places. And in fact, we have a can place bid boolean, so we could probably just attach some additional logic here. And then I'll say if the item dot ends date is less than new date, then we should be able to place the bid. Otherwise, we shouldn't be able to. Other way around. If the ends at is greater than the date. There, so now they show up. And it'd probably be nice to say like auction ended somewhere so that the user is not like looking at this page thinking they could still place a bid. So maybe even underneath the title or after the title here. Let's go here. I think we could probably add a Shadcn badge. Let's go here. This is what a badge looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and just add one in. This. And then let's look at how you can use it. You just basically import it like that. And I'm gonna show a badge here that says like over, bidding over. Import this one. What variants do we have? Destructive, okay. And let's look at the page. So if the bidding is over, you'll see bidding over. But what we want to do is I'm going to put this on a new line. And then I want to give this a class name of wbit. And then I only want to show it if the bidding is over. So I'll go up here. I'm going to say const is bidding over is equal to is bidding over item. Might as well bring in that utility. Where's that utility that we made? Utils bids is bid over. Yeah, so I'll just do this. If the bidding is not over, we can just use that utility here, but then down here, we'll say only show that if the bidding is over. Cool, so now I can place a bid on this item, and then down the road, if this bidding were to end, let's just go ahead and put it in an older date. It says bidding over and those buttons no longer show. And additionally, what we should do is the logic in the action itself, we should probably make that check the bidding's over or not. Because even if you have buttons that are hidden, someone could still hit your actions, I think, and try to bid on something. So let's go here. And after we get the item, I'm going to say if is bid over, pass it the item, then again, we're going to throw an error. This auction is already over, and don't allow someone to try to bid on it again. So the very last thing I want to do is with the notifications in Knock, they do have the ability to send out emails. So if I were to go to integrations here, I could add an integration to, for example, resend. That's something I like using on my side projects. And so you can go ahead and add in resend for sending out emails. And in order to get this working, you have to set up some configuration. So I'm logged into resend, and I'm just going to use an existing account I have just to kind of show you. But you can paste in your API key here. I'm going to paste in my API key that I already have. And then from email, I'm going to say testing at wdcstarterkit.com. That's another domain I already have set up. But if you had your own domain, you would set that up as well. From name, we'll say testing. You could also add all these things in if you wanted to. I'm not going to. Let's just go ahead and say update settings. Hopefully this will work. And we're going to go ahead and go back to that workflow that we originally created where it says user placed a bid. And using the editor here, I'm going to go ahead and just say, how do I do this? I'm going to click this. Okay, so if I just click on the background here, you can go to add a step. And then notice that we have resend now. So I'm going to go ahead and click resend. And not only will that send a notification to my users who are using the app, it'll also send out emails to my users. And you can edit the message template. So let's just go here. I'm going to change the subject line to user outbidded you. And then we want to bring in a block quote, I guess. And if you were to edit this, you'll see that you have access to like recipient. So you can say like recipient name. And you can pipe it to some stuff to split it and like try to get the first name from that. That's pretty cool. But I'm going to say someone has outbidded you. And then I'll click done. I do want to save my changes before I lose them. And then I'm going to add a link. So let's just go here and let's just add in an HTML link here. And let's figure out if I can edit this. I'll say href is equal to http localhost 3000 / items 15. Then I'll say like, check out that auction. Save that again. So now if someone were to click this, if I go to preview and click on this link, it takes you directly to the bid. Obviously, you'd have to replace that with a real domain name in the future. But that works pretty well. And I think there's more ways you can get information. Like that's just one of them, recipient. But I think you can see here you have avatar, you have ID, email, stuff like that. Looks like you also have access to the data. So I can say data dot, and then whatever you put in, I think item ID potentially would show up. Let's just save that and see what happens. And then we're going to go back to the workflow. So now we're going to commit it. You'll see all these changes here. I'll go ahead and say commit to the deployment. And then I'm going to try to bid again. Let's just go here. I'm going to place a bid. And hopefully that should send off an email to my other email account. In fact, I don't know if anyone else has bid on this item other than myself. So let's go and place a bid. I think this is the account who created it. So I need to sign in with a different account. I don't think it matters who. So I'm just going to go ahead and place a bid on this one, place a bid. So now if I go to my email, notice that I got an email directly from Knock using my resend API, and I can click on this and it takes me to the bid. So it's super easy in Knock to just like integrate with emails or Slack or other third-party services when you need to send out different types of notifications when things happen in your system. And that is very powerful. And I actually like that a lot. So that's pretty cool. Check that out. So a quick recap of the Knock dashboard. I think some of the stuff is important to cover. The most important for this tutorial was integrations. That's how you define third-party services you might be integrating with, and also defining how you're going to be integrating to your in-app notifications. And that's what we kind of did in this BidBuddy tutorial. There are workflows where you define a workflow, and when you send a notification to that workflow, you can have it do a bunch of different stuff. So in my case, I had it trigger an in-app notification, also send out emails using the resend API. You can come in here and you can view messages from all of your applications. So like here, I saw that it did send out a resend email, but I also got some in-app notifications, and you can dive into those and just get more information about who the event was sent by, who the event was sent to, what data was attached to it. You can go into your users and manage those individually. So you'll see I have 3 users registered. Some of these I think I could delete. Like I think this is for a different application. Let's just delete those. You have this commits tab where you can go back and see how things have changed over time. So like over here, you can see as I change templates and I change workflows, that's all kind of maintained in a nice commit history. So you can kind of go back in time and revert to that commit if you were to accidentally break something, which is actually really powerful. And I wish a lot of other third-party services had this type of stuff baked in to their configuration management, because when you do a lot of click ops, sometimes you mess stuff up and you break production because of just a simple misconfiguration. So this is nice. And once you've done all your changes, you can actually commit these to a production configuration environment, and you can point to that. So it's kind of nice that you can roll out these configuration changes after you've tested them and then promote them to a production environment. We did a custom email when we did stuff, but you can also just set up some default emails when notifications are sent to users. Analytics, if you want to view how many messages by what type are being sent, daily in your application, that can help give you a better insight into what features are being used. And then some developer configuration. Obviously, you have API keys, you have some logs, webhooks. So if you need to integrate your application with Knock, you could probably have Knock send you webhook notifications when a message is seen, archived, etc. A lot of power in that, where you can actually do different stuff depending on what your users do your events. And then once you have everything set up in development, you can go to production and you can actually get this stuff deployed out. So definitely go check out Knock. I think this is a really, really cool notification service that you can hook into your own applications if you want to notify users when stuff happens in your app. Again, I just want to thank Knock for sponsoring this video and allowing me to be able to make a tutorial for you all. And like always, all the code for this tutorial can be found at webdevcoding/bidbuddy on GitHub, and that link will be in the description. So definitely go check it out, clone it, and try it for yourself if you want to see a nice template of how to get a Next.js application work with Shadcn, Drizzle ORM with Postgres, and then Knock for our notifications. Thanks for watching. Have a good day and happy coding.